So last year, I had this idea for a series of shorter videos where I go back and play 11 older, more obscure video games, and then offer my thoughts on if they're worth going back and playing for yourself. I call this series The Retro Room, and the following video is the entire first season. Additional to this is an announcement that Season 2 is officially in pre-production, but I need some suggestions for older obscure games to go back and visit. So if you've got any ideas on games you'd like to see me cover in Season 2, comment them down below and I'll see what I can do. We're about to take a look at 10 different games, some more obscure than others, and at the end of each one, I'll give my opinion on if the game in question is worth going back to play for yourself. Now, I know there's several Star Wars games in this list, and that's because I'm a pretty big old school Legend Star Wars fan, but if that's not your thing, I've listed the games I'm covering in the description, and you can just skip to whichever ones interest you. The point of this series is to allow me to visit more games and make more content that isn't quite as long and intense as my extensive retrospectives. So, thanks for joining me, and welcome to the Retro Room Season 1. What's up guys, it's Evan Prince, and welcome to the Retro Room, where I go back and look at some of the older games out there. Only rule is that it has to be a decade old or older. With Spider-Man 2 dropping in October and Insomniac opting to cover the infamous symbiote suit arc for the first time in a video game in over a decade, I felt like I had to go back and play one of the other Spider-Man games to tackle this story. And this felt like the perfect way to introduce this concept of the Retro Room that I've had, so let's do it. This was almost the darkest Spider-Man game. So I've always been a Spider-Man fan, loved most of the movies, and played a good bit of the old games, my favorite of which was Ultimate Spider-Man for the PS2. This one, on the other hand, just kinda never made it onto my radar. Yeah, until I did it for this video, I'd never played this game before, and I'd heard some really mixed things about it. The review scores indicated that it was subpar, and even though the audience scores were a bit more favorable, they were still far from praising it. So I genuinely had no idea what to expect going into this game beyond the three things my friend had told me about it. 1, it had a terrible VA for Peter.
I've got a feeling that the bugle is not the target. So, what are your thoughts on the new duds?
2, you could swap between red and black suits on the fly. And 3, Black Cat played a bigger role than in her normal appearances. And after playing the game all the way through one time, here's my thoughts about Spider-Man Web of Shadows. It's conceptually one of the darkest and coolest Spider-Man narratives I've ever seen. Its execution, however, is nothing short of middling. Look, I know what I am, and I am self-aware enough to know that a part of my psyche is still stuck in the early 2000s era of overly grungy, quote-unquote dark and gritty storylines. So the idea of a story about Venom's symbiote slowly taking over New York and turning the city to chaos as Spider-Man struggles with utilizing the power of the symbiote suit to fight back, while dealing with the corruption taking him over, sounds like my actual dream for a Spider-Man story. It's stupid, it's extra, and it's awesome. It's also a shame that the concept was not executed in a way that really realizes the potential of the concept. Interestingly enough, the game was developed by Shaba Games and by Treyarch, who would obviously become far more known for their work on Call of Duty games like Black Ops and World at War, which, fittingly enough, are the edgiest of the Call of Duty games by far. So the fact that this game is trying so hard to be dark and gritty checks out, and I find it quite charming actually. Unfortunately, the dialogue, writing, and voice acting is not at all consistent with the game's narrative, causing a whiplash of conflicting tones and ideas. Let's go ahead and address the elephant. Peter's voice acting in this game is bad. I don't want to say the voice actor is bad, believe me, I know how hard it is to voice Spider-Man, but I do think he was miscast or potentially not given good direction, because his delivery on most of the lines in this game is very hard to sit through. The blame is not totally on him either, because some of the lines they wrote for him to say are just embarrassingly bad. This is nothing new to Spider-Man either, to be honest. There is a ton of Spider-Man media out there, and with it, there are a lot of really cringy miscast voice actors, and writers who aren't cut out to write for the character, giving probably not the best material to work with. Yes, I know Spider-Man is supposed to be quippy and make jokes, but if your writer doesn't know how to make charming quips and interesting jokes, you end up with a cringy and insufferable protagonist, which is what we have here. All of his jokes are way too silly and cringy, and they do not fit. Now, if you're thinking, but Spider-Man's jokes are supposed to be cringy and bad, that's part of the charm, I would say not true, because some of his most beloved iterations are not that way, such as Spectacular Spider-Man as the shining example. And even if that was the case, it shouldn't be that way for this Spider-Man or this story, where we see Peter struggling with the symbiote suit, with Black Cat, with the city falling apart, the cops trying to kill him, and thousands of people dying. It doesn't fit here. Even if cringe dialogue normally supposedly would fit, which again, I don't agree it's supposed to be cringy either, because look at how Spectacular made Peter a little bit of a nerd, but did not make him a clown or a fool, then I still don't think it would fit for this story. The writing feels amateurish, and some of it has not aged super well.
Oh my god, you have a MyFace page, don't you? Dork.
I do not.
Ah, you totally do.
Shut up, kid.
Will you add me as a friend? I'll poke you, you poke me back.
I said shut up!
I bet half the people on YouTube are too young to even remember what poking on Facebook even is. However, during the internal dialogue and monologue, I actually didn't mind this Peter VA. It was only when he was talking to other characters that it felt really bad. And I'm sure this was such an exciting opportunity for the actor, but I really feel this was miscast. There's been a lot of Spider-Man voice actors, and I feel like a lot of them were not very good picks. The best ones, of course, being Yuri Lowenthal, best known for the Insomniac games, and Josh Keaton from the Spectacular animated series. They're sort of the crown jewels of Spider-Man at this point. Some bad or miscast ones, in my opinion, would be Drake Bell, Neil Patrick Harris, and of course, our Web of Shadows actor, Mike Vaughn. I guess that's all just my opinion, though. Okay, let's talk about the gameplay. It's actually really fun. I was genuinely enjoying my time playing through it. The web swinging is responsive and feels great. The combat starts off bland, but after getting some extra moves and getting more familiar with the two suits, it becomes more exciting. The wall combat is ambitious and unique to this title, and it's like a whole separate combat zone with different movesets and expectations. The progression, on the other hand, kinda sucks. Essentially what happens is you meet a quest giver, they tell you to go defeat 10 or whatever of a certain type of enemy, or track down and save 5 civilians or something to that degree. You do that, go back to the quest giver, and after a certain amount of times, there's a boss battle. Fortunately, the boss battles are really fun. At least I liked them. They're not like difficult, but they're dynamic, and it feels like a real superhero fight. Chasing the boss across the open world, swinging through the city, fighting enemies, and facing off against whatever boss it is at the moment. Speaking of quest givers and boss battles, Web of Shadows is actually filled with cameos from other Marvel heroes who occupy the world with you. It's really cool to see the fleshed out New York filled with other Marvel characters who interact with each other. Iron Man and the Fantastic Four are mentioned several times, although they never show up. We do see some other great characters, like teaming up with Luke Cage, Moon Knight, and even Wolverine. Black Widow even plays a major role in the later game plot. And although I was criticizing the voice for Peter, we get some quality voice acting for our quest giver characters. Wolverine is, of course, voiced by Steve Bloom, because duh, and Moon Knight is voiced by Kazuhira Robert Atkins, Why Are We Still Here Miller Downs.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
I really love this feature of getting to work alongside Luke Cage, Moon Knight, and more. It helps make the world feel lived in, and like you're playing a comic run turned into a video game. Additionally, you can even summon characters as allies to help you fight in battles, like it's Saints Row or something. As for the suits, the abilities are different depending on which suit you're wearing. So your red suit has an upgradable set of abilities, and so does your black suit. The upgrades are split between multiple categories such as ground attacks, wall climbing attacks, aerial attacks, and more. This lets you feel like there's a solid sense of character progression, and you can decide which suit's playstyle you prefer and pursue upgrading that one over the alternative. Okay, let's talk about the decisions, one of Web of Shadows' most unique features. Web of Shadows has a sort of morality system. You can get black suit points or red suit points for the way that you play and the things that you do. This aligns the player to either the red or black suit, and it affects which ending the player gets, of which there are 4. I did not know this when I started playing, but figured it out pretty quick and looked into it further as I neared completing it. There are also several key choices where the game allows you to make a serious decision, choosing either a good or a bad outcome, further aligning you with one of the two suits. If you don't want spoilers, click to the timestamp and skip to the next part, as from here on out I'll be talking about the endings and the story overall. These choices are only a small handful throughout the game, and honestly, a few of them feel menial and pointless. I wish that they had more weight to them, but only a couple really feel meaningful. Like the Vulture and Rhino choices just felt lackluster and pointless in my opinion. There are 4 potential endings you can get. 2 good endings and 2 bad endings. The best ending shows Spider-Man getting back with Mary Jane and saving the city. A true hero's happy ending. The second good ending has Spider-Man saving the city, but being ghosted by Mary Jane as his choices with Black Cat have caused her to question their relationship. Both bad endings have Spider-Man choosing not to save the city, but instead become corrupted and try to rule over the symbiotes and become monarch of New York using his new symbiote army. The only difference between the 2 bad endings is that one of them has him ruling with Black Cat as his new love interest, and the other has him doing it alone, hoping to somehow force Mary Jane to be his again. The endings are extra and a little silly, but I feel what they were going for, and it's fun. Quick fact, given the extremity of the scenario we see in the game, it's obviously in its own continuity, but there are some Easter eggs in the game that show the events of the Civil War arc are about to occur, with nods to the Superhuman Registration Act. I just thought that was a cool detail to point out. Anyway, I got the ending where he takes the city for himself, keeps the black suit, and pursues after MJ, which was kind of a cool and fitting ending for this game's narrative. It's probably my favorite overall, and the voice actor's delivery is even pretty good on this ending monologue.
MJ, she thinks she can just walk away. She never understood what it means to have power. Neither did I. But now... I understand what power really is. You'll be mine again, Mary Jane. No one will ever say no to me again.
Web of Shadows is one of, if not the most unique Spider-Man game I've ever seen. From its insane concept of a city-wide symbiote invasion to the multitude of different notable superhero team-ups and the bouncing back and forth between the black and red suits. It's such a bizarre and fun Spider-Man game to play through, and I'm not even sure we'll ever see another game like this in general. I mean, we've seen other Marvel games that feel like lived-in worlds where we witness a comic book style story arc play out, but it just doesn't quite feel the same. Marvel's The Avengers by Square Enix was outright embarrassing, and although the Insomniac Spider-Man games are fantastic and extremely high quality, they feel more like a dialed-in movie script than an over-the-top, insane comic book narrative. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, just that it makes Web of Shadows feel all the more special because of it. Thanks for watching, guys. I know when I talk about games, it's normally a long-form retrospective, but I want to cover more games more frequently, and to be honest, there are games I want to talk about that I just would not be able to commit the time to for a full retrospective. That's when I got the idea for the Retro Room, where we go back into that old room where we store all the games we used to or wanted to play, dust them off, and see what they're all about. Much love, guys, and thanks so much for tuning in. That's all I've got for you. Hey guys, it's Evan Prince, and welcome back to the Retro Room, where we sift through that collection of old games and find one worth talking about. Only rule is that it has to be at least 10 years old. Recently, this channel has been overtaken by Halo due to the recent release of my Halo Combat Evolved retrospective. So, since we're on the subject of Bungie games, let's talk about one of their least known ones, Oni. Released for the PS2 in collaboration with Rockstar Games, Oni is a third-person action shooter game set in a futuristic sci-fi world. While it's technically a Bungie game, it was actually developed by a satellite studio called Bungie West, not the core team known for the other titles like Halo. This was the only game ever made by Bungie West before Microsoft bought Bungie and Bungie West was closed. As for the game itself, man, it's something. I've never seen anything like it. The aesthetic is unapologetic and downright badass. Everything is rooted in this classic 90s Japanese anime aesthetic, and I kinda love it. Each character has like an anime profile picture that pops up when they talk, and it's like something you'd see in a JRPG. The entire game is dripping with this look too. Like each character's design, their dialogue, even the story itself feels like something that was ripped straight out of an old Japanese anime DVD. So much so that I think this would have been better as an anime than as a video game. For all of its flair, inspiration, and style, Oni has equal parts drab, uninspired, and downright unfinished areas. I say this a lot about games, but I keep seeing it be the case. This game doesn't feel done. It feels like I'm playing a beta build, so much so in fact that I'm not convinced this isn't just an unpolished build that they had to ship to meet deadlines. Let's start with looking at the UI. After booting up the game, we get a fantastic splash screen for Rockstar Games, which misled me to believe I was about to be treated to something stylish and finished. Then we get a really cool Bungie splash screen too, then we get this badass opening clip, and after all that, this is what we get. Look, I'm not trying to be harsh, but this is a dreadful looking main menu. Like this isn't something you ship paired with those awesome splash screens and openings. This looks like a placeholder menu. And it doesn't get better from here either. The user interface of this game is bar none the worst part of it, and it's constant. I'll point it out more as I see it, but it's just got a disgusting user interface design. Then we're off to such a rough start for the game. Let me preface all of what I'm about to say with this. I think this game has a ton of cool stuff to offer. We're getting to it, but this opening is awful. Our first look and introduction to this stylish anime-inspired action-adventure game is a tutorial. Not just any tutorial, it's a tutorial that's like 10 minutes long. It holds your hands through the whole thing, forces you to wait and watch before you can participate. It's just terrible. This feels more like a testing room for the game's mechanics than it does a genuine tutorial, and should have never been put in the game. Instead of a tutorial, it should have opened with something intense and fun that lets you learn the controls while feeling like you're in the action. Make it fun. Look at this, dude.
Now you're ready to train with a sparring partner. Let's proceed to the first combat training room. Don't worry, he won't fight back. This training drone will help you learn about blocking attacks so they can instead see different combos.
Just let me play the game! Okay, so bad start. We're finally out of that tutorial now. Maybe we can get into some real action.
Listen, Kanoko.
Are you kidding me? What is this level design? What is this silence? The entire first mission is like this, by the way. In fact, most of the missions are like this. There's no music except for a short track near the beginning or the end of the level. There's no ambience. It just feels dead. Watch my first encounter with an enemy.
Hey! Now don't make me hurt you.
What was going on over at Bungie West? They couldn't have added some ambience or something? To make matters worse, the music in this game is actually pretty good. It's just super rare and it is not written as video game music. It's more like a few regular drum and bass songs were written and then given to the team. Here's a section of the game I've overlaid with the ambient suite from the game itself, but wasn't using at this time. They had ambience. They should have used it so much more, and if this is not enough, then they should have just gotten some royalty-free ambience. I know it was available in packs back then in the early 2000s. Even games like Silent Hill had bits of it. Akira Yamaoka said he even used sample packs to mess with them and help him composing the original Silent Hill's music. Either way, it makes playing it feel barren and dead in a bad way. I played this game on a PS2 emulator, and I know there's a PC version out there, so I went and watched gameplay of that to see if it was any different, and other than looking way better, it had the same music issue. Then there's this first level. It's terrible. It's an ugly interior warehouse, and I don't want you guys to think I'm just hating on this game because it's old. First off, I love old games. Second off, the rest of this game's levels aren't actually so bad. The game design actually gets better and better, but the way the game introduces you to itself is on its worst foot. The tutorial is painful, and this first mission is bland and ugly. I feel like they could have made this level cool too, with just some changes to the audio and some extra assets around the level to make it more interesting to look at. Maybe some cyberpunk looking assets around the level, make it feel like a futuristic warehouse. But instead, it's this drab sequence. And until I learned how to use the compass feature, I was struggling to figure out where to even go. Everything looks the same, which they could have solved with use of lighting and color coding, like painting different rooms in the warehouse different colors or something. They did none of that, so everything looks the same and it's difficult to navigate. Everything hinges on finding these little green terminals that we have to interact with and disposing of anyone standing between us and those terminals. Also, look at this text. This is more of what I was talking about with the UI earlier. This is not meshing with the sleek look that the game was going for. So why are we at this warehouse? Brief overview of the plot. Oni takes place in a dystopian future where most of the world is uninhabitable, and world governments are now one entity presiding over what's left of the livable world. The government is fighting against a large criminal network called the Syndicate. Our main character, codenamed Kanoko, works for the Technological Crimes Task Force, a paramilitary unit specializing in ensuring dangerous technology cannot be acquired and utilized by the Syndicate. Kanoko works for a man named Commander Terrence Griffin and is assisted on her missions by Shinitama, an android referred to in-universe as a Simulated Life Doll, or SLD. The reason Kanoko is at this warehouse is that she is attempting to make contact with the task force mole who has infiltrated the Syndicate to get what information he has. By the time she reaches him though, he's already dead.
It's Chung. I found him.
Dead?
Yes, sir.
Keep moving.
It doesn't take long for Kanoko to realize that this was a diversion to distract the task force from the Syndicate's real plan.
I found a datapad. It's an encrypted shipping manifest that links the warehouse to Masashi Manufacturing. I want to go check it out. It's not far from here.
Well done, Kanoko. Fall back. I'll have you picked up.
Musashi is owned by BGI. According to your latest report, BGI is a suspected syndicate front. If we can prove the connection, we can move against them. I can go in and...
Negative. Fall back.
We can't afford to wait for another team to arrive. We have to move quickly or they are going to get away.
She won't back down. Her adrenals have been rising steadily. Too much stress could destabilize her latency.
All right, Kanoko. I'm giving you a shot at this.
Thank you, sir. I won't let you down.
On to mission number 2. Kanoko gathers a few officers from the task force and heads over to a manufacturing plant. This right here should have been how the game started, in my opinion. The warehouse should have been a second level, and they should have reworked the story to have it start here. This is such a better level, and it's at this point that the game really starts to pick up and be fun. Okay, it's time to talk about the combat. Oni has a very unique take on its combat and controls. It's kind of like a beat-em-up with shooter elements littered in. There's a strong emphasis of martial arts at the core, but there are some shooting mechanics to toy with as well. Kanoko can dodge roll, jump, backflip, and slide. She's got the acrobatic movements she needs to be dangerous, but she's also got some pretty devastating close combat moves. She's got punch combos, kick combos, flips, and spins to take down her enemies. I actually unironically love this, even if it does control horribly. And when I say it controls horribly, I mean Kanoko doesn't seem to do what I'm telling her to do. I mean, it was released in 2002 on a shoestring budget probably, so it's not that big of a deal, I guess, but the potential for this game is immense if it could have just seen another 3 to 6 months of development and get this control issue sorted out. As for the shooting mechanics, they're very straightforward. You can carry one firearm at a time, and you run out of ammo often, so I wouldn't rely on them too much. They're really more of a contingency plan for if you run across an enemy who is also armed. Anyway, back to the game. I really enjoyed this level so much more than the previous one. I love that this feels like a real building somewhere, and if you interact with the civilian scientists, they often have a little bit of dialogue to say, and will even give you hypo health injectors. Pretty reminiscent of older games like Half-Life. I miss stuff like this. The level itself feels so much more like an actual espionage game. We're avoiding turrets, dodging lasers, finding terminals. It's genuinely pretty cool. At the end of this level, we face down the sort of final boss, where we have to avoid these laser beams and hack 4 different terminals multiple times to shut down this literal giant brain. Supposedly, this is an AI, what they call a deadly brain AI, that has gone rampant, and if allowed to continue, could destroy the entire city. Somehow. They didn't really explain it. I'm not sure what it is with Bungie and their fascination with AIs, but their stories continue to age extremely well as we walk into the new era of AI in our own world. This second mission would have been the way to introduce this game. The tutorial and first mission should have been scrapped or moved, and short tutorial messages should have been inserted across this one, because it wasn't until this level that I felt like I was finally playing the game I signed on for. So it turns out that this whole facility is a front for the Syndicate, and was also another diversion to distract Kanoko. We're heading into the third mission now, at the Vago Biotech Research Lab. On our way, the game shows us some dialogue between Kanoko's handlers, talking about her past, implying that there's more to her than it might seem. Get used to that, by the way, because it happens constantly throughout the game. Then we see some dialogue from our main villains, Moro and Barabbas. Real subtle. In fact, Mission 3 opens with us having to fight Barabbas, whatever, in a one-on-one boss battle, the first of the game actually. It's not too hard, but it is cool, and look at this aesthetic. Our protagonist facing off against this machine-human hybrid in the courtyard of a research lab as the sun sets around us. Beautiful. Actually beautiful. This is what I meant earlier about how the game did not put their best foot forward. Unfortunately, this is also where the game takes off the kid gloves and gets stupid hard. I'm going to keep it real with you guys. Getting footage for these videos is hard to balance around my life right now, and spending 30 minutes of the precious hour or two I have repeatedly playing the same section over and over again would make it take weeks to actually finish this video. So I used a few of the cheats in the game to refill my health and do some other things. Look, this game is brutal and the combat is not very polished. Kanoko isn't responsive, and it's pretty hard to get her to actually do what I'm trying to do. So yeah, I used some cheats. Fight me. I haven't really played more than like an hour or two of a Souls game before, but I'll tell you, this feels like a less responsive, far less polished version of that. Maybe one day I'll do a live stream of me playing the Dark Souls games to finally see what they're all about. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. Anyways, back to Oni. Beating this level really doubles down on the difficulty. Okay, so we work our way through this big room of green goo and give chase to the van with our enemy on it. At least we know where he's going though, so Kanoko pursues to an airport.
Oh, no you don't. You're not getting away that easily.
She's right behind us. Should I take her out?
No. Have the rest of the men meet us at the airport.
This level is kinda cool, and I really like the first half of it, but the second half loses its inspired design very quickly and becomes a long series of uninspired large gray rooms. One particular area really reveals a flaw in this game's design. I mean, look at this. I can't get past this dude because when I get even remotely close, he fires off his rocket launcher and kills everyone. It's really annoying, and the game has a bit of a habit of throwing multiple enemies at you, sometimes with guns that will shred your health and expect you to deal with it, which is fine to a degree, except that this game plays like a beat-em-up with levels designed for a third-person shooter and controls like an unfinished game. Either way, Moro gets away on a plane, but not before we get this cool scene.
I've been monitoring the woman tracking us as you instructed. Scanners indicate a standard comlink as well as a second set of subdermal transmissions. Analysis suggests that she is neurolinked to an SLD.
An android? Interesting. They must be using it to monitor her progress. I want it. Tell Barabbas to retrieve it for me.
Now, however, our headquarters are under attack and they're going after our android friend, which leads us to a really cool motorcycle sequence and arguably Kanoko's coolest outfit yet. From here, the game's plot gets really muddy really fast. The Syndicate has attacked our task force headquarters and Kanoko has to go in and stop the siege. Let me just say, I know a lot of the gameplay you're seeing might look fun, but it feels incredibly frustrating and unresponsive to play. I've seen footage of the game on PC and it looks way better. Like the aiming is more steady and the movement is less janky. On the PS2, as I'm emulating it, it does not play very well at all. Back to the plot, Kanoko cuts through the enemy soldiers and enables the power substations before sprinting to try and find our friend Shinitama.
No! Stay away! Kanoko! Help! No!
Gotcha!
Unfortunately, we're too late, and Barabbas takes her away, so we're forced to give chase to the roof and try to catch up to them. But there's nothing we can do. Barabbas stays behind though, and we get a boss fight where we get to take him on and finally put him down for good.
You again.
You can't escape me.
Who says I want to escape? Don't worry, Shinitama. I'm on my way.
This marks the halfway point through the game, but it really should have been more like the 75% mark instead. I'm gonna be honest, I was becoming exhausted with this game by this point. Kanoko gives pursuit to a massive facility called an atmospheric conversion center, which is actually a cool idea both in the lore and just as a cyberpunk mission in general. Before she Batmans down into the plant, we get a flashback of her boss, Griffin, instructing her to not pursue Shinitama to the conversion center, which of course she ignores. What follows is an immense amount of running around these scaffoldings and around this conversion center as we slowly make our way down. Then we are shown a cutscene of Moro torturing Shinitama, which is really just there to reinforce that he's a psychopath.
I'm impressed. You're almost human. Curious, why bother programming you to feel pain so intensely? Of course, pain is a necessary response to certain stimuli, but they could have dulled the sensation or given you a threshold that would limit the extent or depth of your agony. I'm glad they didn't.
After Kanoko finally manages to reach Shinitama, she's already done with, and we get a clip of her warning Shinitama that Griffin and the others are lying about her and who she is, before then exploding. No, really, she self-destructs.
What did they do to you?
You're not who you think you are.
What?
You are my Hasagawa, your father.
You're malfunctioning. Let me get you out of this chair.
Don't! He hurt me, Kanoko. Badly. If you try to move me, I will probably die.
Why? Why did they do this to you?
I am an SLD, an android programmed with your brain engrams. I have seen everything you have seen, felt everything you have felt. They used me to monitor the growth of the chrysalis inside you.
I don't understand.
Sir, bioreadings indicate that the host is in close proximity to the SLD. The Ziox destruct mechanism is charged.
Did you get a waveform reading?
She's all over the charts. The change rate is unstable. It is safe to assume that her latency will rise steadily from here on out.
You don't know that for sure.
What is the yield of the device?
1.21 gigawatts, sir. We're confident it will be enough to destroy her at this proximity. Sir?
Give her a chance.
You heard the readings, Doctor. I can't afford to let her transformation continue uncontrolled. Proceed.
Shinatama, what's wrong?
I have just received a coded self-destruct transmission from TCTF Command. I can't stop the sequence, but I can slow it down.
I'm not going to abandon you. There has to be something I can do.
Goodbye, Kinoko.
No! Goodbye, Shinatama.
Detonation in 30 seconds.
That was dramatic.
I think it's supposed to be an emotional scene, but this game has not given us enough of anything at all for me to care about this character dying. Kinoko then has to fight her way through an entire facility of guards before they try to kill her with a giant fan. I actually didn't mind this part. After being betrayed by her own company and informed by Shinatama that her past is different than she's been led to believe, she breaks into a government building to try and extract any information she can about her past, which isn't a bad mission, I'll admit. This is where we're introduced to even tougher special ops enemies. As soon as she gets the information she wants, this special ops looking character comes in and hacks Kinoko out of the system before taking the data she needs in what is one of the most early 2000s cutscenes I've ever seen in my life. Then we do get a fairly cool chase sequence, and I mean cool more in concept than in actually playing it because this game controls terribly. At the end of this chase sequence we get another boss battle where we fight an assassin character, and I'll admit, this boss battle is kind of fun. Getting her hands on the CD containing who she really is, we move on to the next mission where the game kind of goes insane as we play through a pretty decently done dream sequence. So it turns out that Kinoko's real name is Mai Hasegawa, and her father hypothesized about the possibility of using something called the Deoden Chrysalis to advance humanity's capacity for adaptation. What is the so-called Deoden Chrysalis? Well, the way it's explained in the following mission is that it's the hyper-evolved clone of its host's body. As the host gets hurt or experiences stress, the chrysalis grows and heals its host. The side effect of the chrysalis has given Kinoko, or Mai as her real name, but I'm still going to call her Kinoko, special powers and abilities. After fighting dream versions of Moro, the game's main villain, and Griffin, who she feels has betrayed her, she then has to fight a dream shadow version of herself. It's a cool idea, and I liked how they did it. I also really liked this mission overall. It feels interesting and unique. The only problem is that this should have been the penultimate level, which is what I thought it was. It's not. So what follows this trippy dream sequence level are the most uninspired and worst levels of the whole game. Following this, she breaks into a science facility to confront Dr. Kerr, the scientist who's been looking after her, who she now knows is her uncle. And it just sucks, dude. I was so tired at this point. The game had really overstayed its welcome. After playing something interesting and stimulating like the previous mission, being stuck with what is essentially a filler mission filled with exposition feels painful. After finding Dr. Kerr, he agrees to help her by having her enter a machine so he can figure out how the so-called Deoden Chrysalis is reacting to her body. This is where he explains what it is and also reveals that Muro, the purple-haired villain running around, is actually Kanoko's brother? Who could have guessed, right? Kerr then reveals that he was forced to implant the chrysalis into Kanoko's body to experiment on her as a super soldier to face and fight the Syndicate. I'll give them credit for one thing: the concept of a sub-clone that exists within the host's body hyper-healing and strengthening its host is actually a really cool one. Anyway, a soldier breaks in and kills Kanoko's uncle, Dr. Kerr. She then has to escape from the facility so she can go confront Griffin for forcing this experiment on her, which makes this the penultimate level of the game, which is literally just a reused level from before, and it does suck worse than it did the first time. After fighting our way through the task force headquarters again, but backwards this time, we confront Griffin and have to disable a weird, rewired version of Shinitama, which becomes borderline cyberpunk horror. He's trying to use her to protect himself from Kanoko. I actually vibe with this part. We finally get to Griffin, and we're given the choice to either spare him or kill him.
Emergency override, Griffin Alpha Zero. Emergency override. No, stay back!
Gotcha.
This is a bad idea. Put the gun down.
I'm a rogue agent, haven't you heard? Very dangerous. I'm exactly what you wanted me to be.
So, how does this end?
For you, badly.
That's your call. You can pull the trigger or you can walk away. It's up to you.
I decided to spare him.
I won't be the monster you thought I would be. Just remember what I am. The woman you betrayed because you weren't big enough to take responsibility for your own actions.
And now, we head into the final mission, as we assault the Syndicate Mountain compound. This mission is kind of cool, actually. I like the outdoor snowy environment for part of it. Here we have to stop Muro from completing his plan, which we now discover is to reverse the atmospheric processors and poison the Earth's total atmosphere. This will mean only people with a chrysalis can survive the environment, and they'll have to serve Muro to attain one so they can survive. It's a plot for world domination. That's it. That's what Muro's plan is. And the reason it's being explained right now at the last 98% of the game is because the game itself does not care about this plot. Seriously, you spend the first half of the game chasing Muro not knowing what he's doing, and the second half of the game running from the task force and trying to learn your hidden identity, then right at the very end, you suddenly go back to fighting Muro. Anyway, you know how this goes. Kanoko confronts Muro, and if you spare Griffin, he actually shows up with the task force to help you in the final fight, which is kind of cool, I guess. Then Kanoko defeats her brother, and that's the end of the game.
When I blew the processors, I bought us some time, but at a horrible cost. The dead and the dying now line the streets, but it's impossible to deny the problem any longer. My father's work may prove to be the salvation of the afflicted after all. Mankind as we knew it is doomed. The chrysalis will change us all. Let's hope it's for the better.
Man, if it seems like I started rushing through that about halfway through, that's because I did. Let me break down my thoughts into 3 categories. I'll talk about the plot, the gameplay, and then the game overall. First up, the plot. Oni's story consists of its main plot and its subplot, and they're sort of in the wrong roles. The main plot is that of Kanoko's origin and her growth with the chrysalis in her as the task force observes her strength begin to accelerate, and then Kanoko unveiling the lies she's been told and confronting her mysterious past. The subplot is Muro, her brother, attempting to poison the whole world and sell chrysalises to anyone who will agree to serve him as he rules as a monarch. My issue is that the game does not seem to want to show me this subplot despite it being the only reason any action is happening and the core placement for our game's main villain, Kanoko's brother. Muro's motivation and plan isn't revealed until about 10 minutes before the credits roll, and this plot thread is barely ever talked about through the whole game. The game is instead focused entirely on Kanoko's past and the whole betrayal arc. It just sucks because that feels like it should be the subplot of the game, and even then, most of that doesn't matter until the last few missions anyway. Which leads me to my next point, the pacing and length. This game is too damn long. It's 14 levels and it should be 8. Not only would the game's pacing benefit from it, but imagine how much development time you could have saved cutting down on these missions and redirecting it to finishing the game's combat system and polishing it. Which brings me to the gameplay. This game feels unfinished. It really feels like I'm playing a beta build. I'm not even joking. I know that the game is old, but some of the enemy encounters feel very unbalanced and as though the game wasn't playtested properly. Which really sucks because the combat is genuinely fun and satisfying, but only for like the first few missions. Then it becomes painfully repetitive and dull. It's a beat 'em up with really janky gun combat. Oni should have been short and sweet, instead it's just long and arduous. And when I say it's fun and satisfying, I mean when it works. Because half the time Kanoko doesn't seem to do what I tell her, and other times she'll do things I didn't tell her, like roll me straight off a ledge to my death. It's just really hard to justify how much time they put into all of those levels, half of which look the same as all the others with minor differences, and most of which just have you running around pressing buttons to open doors. Okay, last category, the game overall. Oni's music is really good when it actually plays, and that isn't often. You'll spend far more of the game running around and fighting in absolute silence than you will playing to music, but when it does play, it's pretty great. I'd expect nothing less from the beloved Marty O'Donnell, who assisted on the score along with Paul Sebastian and Michael Salvatore. Oni's art style is impeccable. The loading screens, the mission failed screens, the character designs, all of that is really fantastic. Oni wanted to be like an anime video game, and as far as the art style, they really nailed it. The voice acting is even really good. They got Captain Keyes from Halo voicing your task force handler, which is of course a great choice, and the other VAs range from good to acceptable. It's never bad or phoned in. The big lingering question is, should you play it? Well, unfortunately, I've gotta say no. Despite everything this game manages to do right, the game itself just is not very fun to play, and the story is generic and predictable when it's at its best, and just totally derivative of itself at its worst. I do think this game has insane remake potential though. The modern climate game journalists are clambering over themselves to find and praise games with female leads, and you've got a great concept for a game with colorful characters, a cyberpunk anime art style, and potentially interesting plot just waiting to happen here. Remake this game and do a remaster of the old one and package it in with it. Do the remake ground up like Unreal 5 or something, and bam, you've got potentially a new franchise sitting there. You could probably even license a Netflix anime adaptation to go with it. I mean, come on, it's ripe for it. Take-Two Interactive currently owns the rights to the IP, so I have no doubt they could do something with it if they wanted to. If I was a betting man though, given this game has little to no fan base and was released to average reviews, I'm not sure I'd count on seeing a total remake, to be honest. Now a remaster? Maybe. I wouldn't be surprised if they did a remaster, fixing some tweaks and porting it to modern consoles with an updated PC port. As for now though, I'm recommending we leave this one on the Retro Room shelf. If you're interested in it, just watch a playthrough. Welcome back to the Retro Room, everybody, and today I've got something special ready. You know how this works. We look back at old and interesting games with the only rule being it has to be at least 10 years old. Back in May, during my extensive retrospective of Star Wars Bounty Hunter, I mentioned that I had a bunch of other Star Wars games I wanted to cover, but I can't do extensive retrospectives on all of them, so today we're pulling a couple off of the shelf here in the Retro Room. Normally, I of course only do one game per video, but today we're covering 2 games in a series, and that is Star Wars Rebel Assault 1 and 2. Now, I played both of these games as a kid, but it was when I was really young, so I'm excited to get into it and see what kind of memories they trigger. Let's get started. Star Wars Rebel Assault 1 and 2 are both on-the-rails shooters that feel more like arcade games than PC games. Each of them is relatively short and can be beaten in an hour or so if you're pretty good at them, but that's the real trick, isn't it? Being good at them. Because these games are notoriously hard. Well, particularly the first one. Rebel Assault is older than I am and was released for the PC all the way back in 1993 when PCs were still using MS-DOS. So the technical restrictions on what LucasArts were capable of creating were tighter than pretty much any other time in the history of video games. Graphically, they mixed pre-rendered backgrounds with minimal 3D graphics, relying heavily on sprite work. I'm just going to say it up front, this game controls like garbage. I opted to use a controller for this game because the mouse control just does not function properly, although I still used it sometimes depending on the section. The controller isn't much better though, unfortunately. After playing the game for actual hours, I was able to kind of get the movement down a bit better, but the sheer mercilessness of the game's health system matched with the totally unresponsive controls manages to siphon anything even closely approaching fun. And if you run out of lives, you've got to start all the way back at the beginning of the game again. Luckily, the game does have cheats that let you refill your health as you take too much damage, so I was able to actually play through the whole game. And if it wasn't for that, there's no way I'd have gotten through it in anything close to a reasonable time frame. But it also allowed me to play through multiple times in a timely manner. Surprisingly, Rebel Assault lets you choose if you want to play as a male or female main character, which is kinda neat and way ahead of its time. Anyway, let's talk about the story. Rebel Assault 1 and 2 are both part of a self-contained, non-canon what-if scenario of Star Wars. The story and characters are not part of the larger Star Wars Legends lore and only exist in this small what-if story. The first game is essentially a retelling of Episode 4 A New Hope with an element of The Empire Strikes Back added in. The basic premise is, what if Luke Skywalker never left the farm? Then who will take down the Death Star and fight the Empire? Well, in comes our unlikely hero, Rookie 1, a stand-in for the player, I'm assuming. Our adventure starts, of course, on Tatooine. Son of a bitch. Where we embark on a training mission through Beggar's Canyon in a T-16 Skyhopper. This is actually kind of cool. I don't know another game that lets you play as a T-16 like this, much less make the iconic Beggar's Canyon run, so it's pretty neat. Too bad it controls like rocks in a blender, though. Following that, we're flying over the Tatooine surface, shooting target drones in what I think was a big missed opportunity to bullseye womp rats, but whatever. You know, the line. Get it? Also, most of these missions are only like 60 seconds long, only ever occasionally being longer than 3 minutes, but the struggle to not die can make them feel like forever. With training done, we link up with Commander Farrell in an A-Wing, which is kinda cool. I actually really like how they did these animated cutscenes. They've got that old 90s game charm. This character is kind of Han Solo's replacement since there's no Han in this game. So we head into an asteroid field and shoot some ice rocks in space. Thankfully, this mission is a little easier once you get the hang of it. There's a lot of space missions like this, so I probably won't have much to say about a lot of them. We got more training missions left, and so we head to the planet Kalidor. Wait, stop the clip. You mean to tell me there's planets in Star Wars other than Tatooine? Also, this planet looks dope. It's the one from the cover too. I really like the design. Too bad it's stupid difficult. Also, we're introduced to this character whose name I genuinely can't discern.
Rookie 1, welcome to Kalidor. This is Commander Rumorlane.
Rumorlane?
Rumorlane.
Whatever. We land and have a drink with Room Your Lane as the game shows us a clip of the Tantive 4 getting captured by a Star Destroyer as shown in the 4th movie. Gotta hand it to the devs, the cutscenes and voice acting are impressive by 1993 standards. Now finally, we get to pilot an X-Wing. Rookie 1 and Ruyar Lian fly out to a Star Destroyer by themselves where we have to blow up a bunch of turrets, fight off some TIE fighters, destroy the shield generators, and then fire off a proton torpedo into the bridge of the vessel. You can miss the shot, but if you do, Rular Lane comes in and hits it for you anyway.
Now let's get down there and hope we're not too late.
The Imperials then come in and destroy the rebel base located on Tatooine because I hadn't had enough of it yet, and we just decimate these TIE fighters and head out. With the Imperials attacking the Mos Eisley spaceport, I assume searching for the droids, we swoop in and take out literally dozens of AT-STs. Hard to believe, but at least flying around near Mos Eisley like this is pretty cool. This mission is a much needed break from how hard the other ones are. We then chase some TIE fighters back into space and into another asteroid field to take them out. Like I said, there's a lot of filler space missions. Next up, we're on Hoth for some reason. The first Death Star isn't even gone yet. The Battle of Hoth should not be happening, but for some reason, we're hunting probe droids in the Battle of Hoth way before it should actually be happening. I guess it's cool we get to play as a snowspeeder in these caves chasing probe droids. Speaking of, this level is a labyrinth, and you can accidentally get stuck in here for a while if you don't figure out the correct path. Then we get to do the iconic AT-AT Imperial Walker sequence. Yes, it is AT-AT, not AT-AT. You call it an AT-ST, not an AT-EST. So I'm calling it an AT-AT. It's an acronym for All-Terrain Armored Transport anyway. To destroy it, you just shoot it at various weak points until it explodes, and that's that. Next up is where things get interesting, because although this is almost entirely a vehicle-based Star Wars game, after we get shot down, we have to run through an Imperial base on foot and kill some stormtroopers. Well, isn't this interesting? Got some variety going on. And how much more classic Star Wars can we get than shooting some good old-fashioned stormtroopers? Too bad it sucks. Seriously, this is bad. I can only give this game so much leeway for being 30 years old, which it literally is. I mean, however bad this looks to control, I can assure you it is actually worse. I guess it does look kinda cool though. We fight our way through this ground combat section and get back into an X-Wing to fly off into the third act. We get another space section where we get to fight off some more TIE fighters while protecting an escaping rebel transport, which after knocking that out, we watch the Death Star blow up Alderaan and set course for Yavin 4. Guess that must be a canon event. Then we get the classic scene where the Death Star run is shown and the weaknesses in the exhaust port are explained to the rebel pilots. Except since Luke isn't around, it's up to Rookie 1 to take on the job. Before we can head up to take on the Death Star, however, we gotta fly through another canyon and hit some target drones to sharpen our instincts. Because this game really loves its canyon sequences, and trust me, they're not going anywhere. Then we head up, do another space battle, taking out some TIE fighters, and the coolest part of this level is that when you arrive, the Death Star is pretty far off in the distance, but as you play, it actually gets closer and closer until you beat the level. The remaining missions are all centered around the Death Star itself, starting off with us taking out a bunch of turrets on the surface, and the only other mission in this style, which is interesting. In the first level they introduce us to this kind of top-down shooter style, but we only see 2 instances of it ever occurring. Anyway, before we can hit the trench run, there's a matter of this giant turbo laser that we need to take down. It's similar to the AT-AT run and takes a minute, but once we're through that, we can finally begin our final descent. I mean, it's kinda cool, I'll be honest. Making the Death Star trench run in any capacity is an iconic event, so getting to see it and play through it feels good. As we approach the exhaust port, the events of the movie essentially play out. One of our guys fires off a shot and misses, leaving it up to us with multiple TIE fighters on our tail. That's when Commander Farrell shows up and gets them off our backs in a very Han Solo fashion. And all we have to do is make the shot, which, if you miss, gives you this hysterical ending cutscene.
It's away! Oh no!
The destruction of Yavin left the Alliance helpless against the ruthless power of the Empire. The Death Star continued to extinguish rebel bases throughout the galaxy, and the Alliance was defeated.
Oh no!
Otherwise, we get the torpedo in, destroy the Death Star, and save the galaxy. We even get a little clip of who I think is supposed to be our character going up to receive his award for his courage and accomplishments, even though it's clearly just a repurposed Luke from the movie. And that's Rebel Assault. It's really not a great game, and the fact that it's just a non-canonical retelling of A New Hope means it offers very little to the overall universe as well. So is it worth playing for yourself? No, it's not. Let me be real here. The gameplay is trash. The story ranges from uninspired to outright non-existent, and there's next to nothing new on offer here. You'd actually be better off just watching the movies with your time than playing this. With all of the fantastic older games out there, this is one to leave on the shelf. So what about its sequel, Rebel Assault 2: The Hidden Empire? Let's find out. Well, the first thing I noticed about this one is that there's a bigger budget, and the team seemed to have improved their skills. Something else to note is that Rebel Assault 2 actually got a console release on the Sony PlayStation, and I even owned it for a brief time. Would you believe this game had the audacity to ship with 2 discs despite only being roughly an hour long to complete? The reason for this is that it's 50% cutscenes that were filmed in a live-action format on a green screen. Also, the PlayStation port came out a year after the original PC port, so there are some improvements from what I've seen. And when I say 50%, by the way, I mean literally half of this game's hour-long runtime will be spent watching the roughly 30-minute live-action movie play out. These nerds actually made what is essentially a 30-minute Star Wars movie to go with their game, set in their own non-canon universe where their OC, Rookie 1, replaces Luke Skywalker. And they went all out too, putting the characters in movie-accurate outfits, using actual Star Wars props, and even filming in a studio on a green screen. It's impressive, but because of this, Rookie 1 is only playable as a male, unlike the preceding game. So is it at least good? Well, it's better than Rebel Assault 1, that's for damn sure. We actually have a plot this time that's not just a worse ripped-off version of A New Hope, that is, and it's mostly unique to just this game too. Rebel Assault 2 opens with a couple of Rebel pilots patrolling a region of space called the Drayton Triangle, talking about some supposed ghost ships before suddenly they get attacked and destroyed.
Years since the Battle of Drayton. I mean, how can so many different things...
What the... I've been hit! I don't like my feeling!
Jen, what are you doing? I can't hold it! Watch it!
Rebel Control, emergency. We're under attack. Can you read us? Is anybody out there?
Okay, so we're doing a Bermuda Triangle story in Star Wars. I'm game, let's see what's up. Shortly after this opening cutscene, we're reintroduced to Rookie 1, who is this time being portrayed by an actual living human in live action, as he and his commanding officer receive a distress signal from a cargo freighter called the Corellia Star. Also, we're in B-Wings, which is awesome. I love all the different types of starfighters there are in Star Wars, and the B-Wing is so underutilized. They even made the lasers come out in a triangle just like they would from a B-Wing, and it's just so kino. I would say the most impressive part though is that it actually controls decently. Like, it doesn't suck. The mouse isn't flying all over the place and making it impossible to play the game. The cursor goes where I'm aiming in what is the biggest improvement to the whole game, because now it's genuinely playable without the use of cheats. Back to the story, our B-Wing gets shot down and we have to eject, which showed me how the B-Wing eject function works for the first time, and that one thing is probably the best contribution to the Star Wars lore these two games will ever offer. So now we're stranded on a desolate planet and wandering to try and find a way off this rock. And the live-action cutscenes finally earn their keep, as we get an on-foot section similar to the first game, except this time it actually works. It's pretty much what it looks like. You get into a room, duck into cover to avoid being shot before peeking out and shooting the troopers as they flood in. Again, I've got to give some more credit because the environment and scenes themselves are actually inspired and good. Like this part where you're shooting at stormtroopers over a monorail system and they fall into the electrified tracks, evaporating them. It's cool. I really enjoyed it. Finally, we stumble upon the ship we got a distress signal from before, the Corellia Star. This part is stupid hard to play on the PC, but I've seen the PS1 footage and the ship is much smaller and easier to control, so it makes way more sense on that one. Not sure why it's so massive on the PC version. This might also be the only time I've seen a YT-1300 Corellian light freighter in Star Wars that wasn't the Millennium Falcon, so that's cool. I also really like the look and style of this pipe tunnel. This is where the game shows us Vader for the first time, as he has a discussion with an Imperial Admiral regarding the Phantom Fighter program.
Your report, Admiral San. I trust the operation is proceeding as planned.
Yes, Lord Vader. The field tests have been completed. In 12 hours, a fleet will stand ready at Imdar Alpha, where they'll be poised to lay waste to the rebels.
Then I will look forward to witnessing our victory. Make way to Imdar Alpha.
As you command, my lord.
That's kind of the plot of this game. It's about these Imperial Phantom Fighters, which essentially are just a type of TIE fighter equipped with cloaking capabilities. And for some reason, Rookie 1 looks like Paul Walker.
I like the tuna here.
Rest in peace. We get to see Vader's capital ship, the Wait, apparently it's called the Terror? Okay, so in this fanfic universe, it's called the Terror for some reason. The plan is for Rookie 1 to link up with a rebel soldier on the forest moon of Imdar. Not Endor, Imdar, which is basically the same thing except a swamp. Following that, our two characters are to board an Imperial shuttle to sneak onto the Imperial capital ship, the Terror, and steal one of the Phantom Fighters from the hangar in order to study it and discover a way to track or fight back against it. Which is just about the dumbest idea I've ever heard. But hey, we do get to fly a TIE fighter as our character practices getting the hang of piloting an Imperial vessel. Next up is our flight to Imdar, where we also get to fly a Y-Wing. Man, this game is just letting us fly all the ships, isn't it? I'm not as big of a fan of the Y-Wing, admittedly, but it's still cool we get to fly it. Eventually, we make our way to Imdar, where we touch down and make contact with the rebel soldier waiting for us there. And hey, it's Rue Merlin again, which apparently is spelled like this. And after looking it up, was actually the real name of the voice actress for her in the first game, and they just carried it over. Anyway, here's the speeder part, which is neat in concept, but doesn't play very well in the game itself. Once again, after watching some footage from the PS1 version, that one plays significantly better than the PC version, and the bike is smaller and totally 3D, unlike here where it's too big and seems to be partially sprite work. Rue Merlin and Rookie 1 then suit up in some Stormtrooper armor and board the Super Star Destroyer, which does offer a pretty cool cutscene of its uncloaking. I really did enjoy the next couple of missions, which depicts our heroes fighting through the ship on foot while donning the iconic white armor, and you can't deny it looks pretty cool. This plays out the same as the first on-foot section did, hiding behind cover to avoid being shot, and peeking out to take aim and kill the opposing troops. The next section continues the on-foot aesthetic, but puts us in first person, letting us see inside of the visor of a stormtrooper using the night vision to defend ourselves. And I gotta admit, I kinda love this. The galactic basic language plastered across the screen, the rifle sprite that looks like they ripped it straight from Dark Forces, the troopers dropping down from above and peeking around corners, you have to admit there's some charm here. Finally, we find a Phantom Fighter and climb aboard to commandeer it and escape the Terror, but not before we get a full escape sequence flying through the inside of the Super Star Destroyer and taking out all kinds of internals in the process. The design of the tunnels and stuff is just really fun. Eventually, we get to what I think is the core of the Terror and blow it to hell before speeding off into space, where we have a sort of final battle against the other Phantom Fighters as we watch the Terror explode in the distance. After destroying the Super Star Destroyer, however, a far more sinister secret is revealed. It was connected to an enormous space station that had been cloaked the whole time. So in one last-ditch effort to put a permanent stop to the Phantom Fighter problem, Rue Merlin takes us into the heart of the space station as we fly straight for the core to blow it up from the inside. It's a cool ending twist, and an enjoyable final run for the game to end on, in my opinion. Barely escaping the explosion with our lives, the space station is destroyed for good, giving the rebels a massive victory. The game then ends on a celebration for the rebels as Rookie 1 kisses Rue Merlin, and then they express their excitement over the big win. If nothing else, it's a better ending than the previous game. Except, wait.
The rebels have eliminated your invincible fleet.
Yes, my master. The rebels have proven surprisingly clever. But we are not defeated.
So what's gonna happen to our little ghost ship there?
Our engineers are coming to examine it. I assume they'll try to adapt its technology to our own fighters.
And we blew up all their Phantom ships, so...
Right. So for a change, we might have the advantage over the Empire. The next time we go into battle.
Yeah, they sequel bait for a threequel that never came in what might be the first after-credits scene ever in a Star Wars title. Rebel Assault 2 was an improvement on its predecessor in every imaginable way and does manage to offer something of an interesting story to go with its on-the-rails spectacle. But is it worth playing for yourself? Actually, yeah, it might be. If you're a mega Star Wars fan looking for other fun entries into the universe, or if you like rail shooters, this could be worth the hour of your time it would take. Or if you already bought it on sale for like $2 like I did and just want a reason to put some time into it, I'd say Rebel Assault 2 is a decent enough time for a rail shooter to give you a fun arcade vibe with a Star Wars coat of paint. Also, I'm not sure if you noticed, but there's no Tatooine. We did it! We found a Star Wars game that doesn't feature Tatooine! I'm both shocked and elated, even if it has to be this one. At least I know there's one out there. Definitely skip the first one though. Look, I could criticize both games heavily. Even the second one is lackluster when it's at its best, but these games are older than I am. And I mean that literally. It's not super fair to be criticizing them from a modern lens when back then this was about as good as it got. Anyways, thanks for watching guys, as always. Did you enjoy this time capsule of a game? What do you think about the Rebel Assault titles, or just old Star Wars games in general? Let me know some titles you'd like to see me cover here on the Retro Room. I'm always looking for new ones to experience and make a video on, so drop some recommendations below. Welcome back to the Retro Room, everyone, and I know what you might be thinking. Am I about to talk about the notorious canceled DareDevil game for the PS2 that we never got? Well, although that is a super interesting story, there's already been plenty of coverage on it. Instead, I want to talk about the DareDevil game that did get released to the public. DareDevil for the Game Boy Advance. Wait, hear me out. The GBA was loaded with literally hundreds of licensed adaptation games. Drake and Josh, Bionicle, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Bionicle, Movie Batman, Cartoon Batman, Bionicle, Pirates of the Caribbean, Spy Muppets licensed to Croak. It seemed at the time like if it was popular, there was a Game Boy Advance game for it. So of course, Sony saw that and demanded their DareDevil movie get a game too. Since I'm assuming it was so easy to make these side-scroller beat-em-ups, it was obliged. Here's where things get interesting though. DareDevil for the Game Boy Advance isn't an adaptation of the movie. It's a sequel to it. Yeah, this game has a story that is standalone and takes place after the movie, can be consumed entirely on its own, and the best part, it's actually good. Yeah, I like the story of DareDevil for the Game Boy Advance, which is not a sentence I ever expected to utter in this timeline. It's got Kingpin doing shady things to try and mess with Matt, it's got tension between Matt and Elektra, we get to fight Bullseye again, it has a built-in function for Matt to use his senses to find things, characters from the comics like Echo make cameos, it's even got a sewer level, which I know Civvy would love. It's all just honestly kinda cool. Booting up the game, we're off to a good start. The color red saturates everything and the opening is moody. I love it. Getting to the menu, we get that movie logo and a handful of options, but let's get into the game and figure out what the hell the story of this even is. First thing we get is an opening montage of scenes from the movie to recap and set up the events of the game itself. Following that, the game actually opens with Matt talking to Stick, his instructor. Stick tells Matt that Kingpin has just met with Elektra at his penthouse, so Matt elects to go find her and discover why she was there. Then we get our first mission, set in the dark streets of New York, and what is that? Okay, that's an odd avatar, but ignoring that, we cut through these thugs, and I admittedly enjoy the layout of this level. The design and aesthetic is pretty cool. We catch up to Elektra, who accuses Matt of selling out, before he then tells her he didn't sell out and that she was the one who went to visit Kingpin. She claims she only met with him to turn down his deal and that Matt is going to wish he did too. Matt, however, has no idea what she's talking about. The pursuit continues. The next stage actually has us fighting thugs on the rooftops. It's really cool. Feels like we're playing a real DareDevil game, dated as it might appear. This level also introduces a mechanic that has Matt able to jump from ledges. I enjoyed this touch. We catch back up to Elektra, who again begins talking to Matt about something he's clearly in the dark about, saying he must have really needed the money. This third stage has us jumping atop moving cars, fighting Kingpin's goons as we hop from car to car. I gotta admire the creativity on this one. It's a very clever level, and it's cool in my head to imagine Daredevil hopping from car to car as he fights these thugs. Next stage, we finally corner Elektra, and she immediately engages into combat with us, giving us our first boss battle of the game. It's a bit finicky to control, but it's not insane or anything. A decent first boss battle, I think. When she finally loses, she pretends not to know why they're fighting, so Matt reminds her that she believes he's working with the Kingpin. She tells him that the Kingpin is going to claim he's paying Daredevil for every criminal he defeats, but then obviously won't actually be giving him any money. Matt is doubtful of this claim, not fully understanding what she's saying, but upon pressing the matter, she retracts and doesn't want to talk anymore. What I really love about this is that it's exactly the kind of thing Kingpin would actually do. You'll see what I mean later. We then see Matt and Foggy in their law office as the radio announces that Fisk has taken public credit for paying Daredevil to dispatch the group of thugs he just cleared out. Foggy asks Matt what his thoughts are on the vigilante accepting payment for what he does, and Matt tries to play it cool but suggests he finds it unusual. After that, the radio announces that Daredevil has been invited to a face-to-face confrontation at the docks from an anonymous source. Matt surmises this to be Kirigi from the Ninjas of the Hand. Kirigi confronts Matt on the docks about his supposedly accepting payment from Kingpin, to which Matt of course denies. This results in the next few stages being a brawl against the Ninjas of the Hand to prove he has not partnered with Kingpin. The first of these is still on the docks, with the second stage taking place on a barge as we continue to fight the Hand. Finally crossing over, we end up on a bridge fighting our way across a series of thugs and ninjas in broad daylight. Cars pass by us, and we can even see the city in the background. At the end of this bridge, we finally confront Kirigi, who claims he now believes our innocence and laments that he must now kill Daredevil. Matt happily obliges as the two battle it out in our second boss battle of the game. Kirigi is fast, but once you figure out his patterns, you can beat him pretty easily. After we beat him, he vanishes, and Stick appears next to us to inform us we're not done yet. The sewer people, that's what they're called, now believe Kingpin is coming after them and sending Daredevil to attack them, so they respond in force by trying to expand out into the city, which Matt obviously has to put a stop to, ironically causing them to manifest what they were worried about. What follows are some of the worst stages in the game. Matt heads to a dilapidated warehouse full of junkies and thugs who believe Daredevil is here to take them down on Kingpin's payroll, which of course we do end up carving through the criminals in standard superhero fashion. At least, that is the idea, because in reality, I was getting slaughtered by this level, playing it repeatedly in an attempt to beat it, which of course after doing, we head down into the obligatory sewer level. Insert obligatory civvy reference. Even though this level is far more of a labyrinth, it's actually not nearly as unplayable as the last level. I even kind of enjoyed the design they had going on here. There's a fair bit of this aesthetic comprising several levels of the game specifically for these sewer missions until we encounter King, i.e. King of the Sewers. A very minor character who leads the sewer people. Believe it or not, he is a real character from the comics, but he's barely known and only shows up in a handful of issues actually. So it's kind of cool that he's even here. The boss fight itself is easy. You just wait for his tell and whack him until he's out. Daredevil takes him down and heads back to the law firm with Foggy. There we can see the radio talking about Fisk's payments to Daredevil affecting his public perception as a hero. It then reports on a young woman vaulting obstacles down by the subway demanding to see Daredevil, which causes Matt to make an excuse and rush there straight away. Here we encounter another cool character brought in from the comics, Echo. This does make sense given she served as a supporting character for Daredevil in her inception and was a relatively new creation when the game was being made. Matt being blind and Echo being deaf makes for a very weird combo of heroes here. She calls out Matt for his supposed service to Kingpin, which he of course denies. She then bails out and leaves Matt to chase after her, taking down a small army of thugs between she and him. These levels are far better than the preceding sewer levels. The subway look feels way more like playing a Daredevil game, and although most of the stages have hazards, the moving trains on this level are probably my favorite. We even get to fight on top of moving trains as we chase her down, and it's genuinely pretty awesome. Now's a good time to talk about the combat. It's super simple, but effective. Matt has a jump attack, punch kick combo by hitting B, and he can hit thugs with his baton using the right trigger. The left trigger of course activates his special ability, allowing him to sense things. Sometimes when I use the baton button he throws it, other times he doesn't. I think this has to do with the power-ups we can find around the map, but I'm not sure. Speaking of, the power-ups are mildly helpful but mostly useless. There's one that makes you invincible temporarily and turns your suit silver while you fight. It's the most useful one by far. These DareDevil coins are collectibles that you can collect across each stage, and if you collect them all, you unlock a handful of secrets ranging from concept art to screenshots of the movie. The best secret unlocks, however, are the alternate costumes. If you unlock all the secrets in the game, you unlock classic comic book costumes for Daredevil, Kingpin, Elektra, and Bullseye. More on that momentarily. Eventually, we catch up to Echo herself and face off in our next boss battle. She informs Matt that she plans to defeat him and use his costume to take down the Kingpin's bounties herself to collect the money. Matt is, of course, not very fond of the idea, so they begin fighting. This is such a clever idea too, because we're fighting on top of a train and occasionally we pass through these tunnels where we can't see anything. When that happens, we have to use Matt's vision to see and fight back because, like Matt, Echo doesn't need her eyes to see. I love that they found a way to integrate the Daredevil vision into the actual gameplay like this, and with such a cool comic book-like set piece. After defeating Echo, she strangely disappears and Stick is just there, on the train, telling Matt that Bullseye is waiting for him in the construction yard to have a showdown, which is more than a little strange since I'm pretty sure we see him die in the movie, which is supposed to take place before this. All that brings me back to what I was saying before about the classic costumes you can unlock for the characters. This game is technically a sequel to the 2003 Daredevil film, but it doesn't feel like it, and in many ways isn't written like it. In fact, it feels way more like a game ripped straight out of the comics with merchandising from the movie to try to sell it more. With that in mind, I think this game can be enjoyed far more by playing it with all of the classic costumes enabled. Unfortunately, you have to complete the game and collect all the tokens and everything to do so, which defeats the point. So what you're gonna want to do is access the password screen from the main menu and enter this code right here, and it unlocks everything. Then just play it from the beginning like that. It's way cooler that way. Just see the Bullseye comparison. For the rest of the video, it will be played this way. Back to the story, Daredevil arrives at the construction yard and confronts Bullseye there. He asks Matt how much Kingpin is offering him, to which Matt reveals the truth that Kingpin is lying to everyone about the supposed bounties. And for the first time, someone actually believes Matt up front. Except Bullseye thinks that maybe if he takes Daredevil out, Kingpin will pay him for it. Except Bullseye informs Matt that the construction yard they're at is run by the Yakuza gang members, and that he'll let them take a stab at killing Daredevil first and then take credit if they succeed. To which we embark on the third act and try to take out a whole construction yard's worth of gangsters. Again, this is a great set piece, really puts the sewer levels to shame. The sunset New York skyline, the different equipment we climb over and fight atop, like battling thugs on top of an unfinished New York high-rise is such a great penultimate setting for a Daredevil game. And now that we're in the classic costumes, I'm just pretending this is an adaptation of the comics now. Swinging from crane hooks as we see the sky get darker every level makes this whole arena just feel colorful and alive. Near the top of the building, we find Bullseye hiding out. The two have a brief conversation about Daredevil having cut through all those Yakuza and then face off. The battle isn't that difficult, but it's a little fun penultimate boss. Following his victory over Bullseye, Daredevil speaks out loud that this problem isn't going to stop until he goes and confronts Kingpin directly. We have reached the end of the line, and this is the final level before we face Wilson Fisk. We have to climb floor by floor, facing off against dozens of Yakuza and Kingpin's hired thugs. What's even better is that this is technically just a really long hallway scene. Yeah, I know. Look, I only used She-Hulk because he wears the yellow suit like in the game. Anyway, after fighting our way through 8 floors worth of goons, we finally have our final showdown. Kingpin basically tells us that even though Daredevil isn't actually working for him, he still helped push Kingpin's interest by taking out his competition, to which Matt responds by beating the hell out of Fisk until he agrees to publicly deny ever having paid Daredevil anything. And this boss fight sucks. It's the hardest in the game for sure. First, he summons these drones that you have to take down, and then the fight against him is insane. He can hit you pretty much anytime you're near him, and the only way to land a hit on him is to jump dive kick him specifically on his head. Anything else and the hit doesn't land, meaning he takes no damage. I had to grind at this particular battle for a solid few minutes, but eventually, I beat it. Kingpin agrees to publicly declare Daredevil was not on his payroll, but makes sure to inform Matt that this is a minor inconvenience to his overall plans. And lastly, we see Matt and Foggy in their office one final time as the radio announces that Fisk declared the Daredevil bounties the result of a rumor caused by an accounting error. With that arc resolved, the game ends and the credits roll. So the big question, do I think this game is worth trying for yourself? And the answer is, probably not. I do think it's fun and I enjoyed my time with it, but outside of the novelty of playing as Daredevil, there is very little this game has to offer. The gameplay does work and it definitely shows ingenuity on the developer's part, but it tends to be repetitive. And as far as GBA games go, there's probably better titles to spend your time with. So unless you're like a Daredevil superfan, I'm recommending we leave this one on the Retro Room shelf. There are so many games released back when I was younger that I unfortunately missed out on due to a myriad of reasons, resulting in it being difficult for me to attain said games. One of those games was the infamous TimeSplitters, a game which always looked so mystical and exciting, and I never got to play. I knew of it, and I was vaguely aware of the premise, but as I got older and new games continued to release, it got lost to time in my memories and I never ended up trying it. Well, when browsing the shelves of the Retro Room, which isn't a real thing and it's just old games I want to play, this one came to mind, and here we are. So, what is TimeSplitters? After spending a few hours in the game and beating each of the levels a few times, I can confidently say, I'm not entirely sure, but it's fun. The game's menu and presentation is great. The aesthetic feels so early 2000s PS2 era. Anyone who's been on this channel very long knows I put a heavy emphasis on the execution of the menu and presentation of a game. It's your first impression, so it's really important. I had literally no idea what I was doing on my first playthrough. I'd never seen any of these characters or levels before, so it was a really fresh and exciting campaign to play through. First, let's talk about the story. There isn't one. Instead, we get a series of missions, each set in a different time period where we play as one of two unique selectable characters per mission. It's always a choice between a male character and a female character. This is a very arcade-like game. The premise is ambitious in some ways and reserved in others. To be a game that was released in October of the year 2000, I've got to say, it holds up pretty well. Let's go mission by mission really quick. Each mission is named first after the year it's set in, followed by the location itself. The first of which is called 1935 Tomb. The two characters we have to choose from here are Captain Ash, the alcoholic, or Lady Jane, the angry dress-wearing Kohl's employee. There's no lore for any of these characters beyond how they look as far as I'm aware, and who you play has no effect on the gameplay. The game is clearly designed with a multiplayer functionality in mind, so that's the reason for the colorful characters to choose from. I'm not going to cover all of the characters, but all you need to know is that all of the male characters are like quirky cartoons, and all of the female characters are social media ethos. Anyway, the first level features you running through an Egyptian tomb in 1935, killing cultists, mummies, and zombies in order to retrieve an artifact and put it where it belongs. The reason it's not where it should be is due to the alien race known as the TimeSplitters going in and messing with things in the timeline where they shouldn't. You'll see them appear by sort of portaling via these green effects. They normally start appearing after you've retrieved the item you needed to get and are headed back to the exit, though I've seen them appear before that. Interestingly enough, this was the hardest level in the game for me. Yeah, they got easier from here for some reason. I was actually charmed by these old graphics, and even the old school music sounds like it's straight from Crash Bandicoot. Anyways, we get the Ankh and start heading back to return it. This is when the TimeSplitters start showing up to stop us. Fighting through them, we drop it back off where it goes, and we move on to the next level. From 1935 Egypt all the way to 1970 Chinatown, this actually feels a lot more like I'm playing an old PS2 FPS. I can't quite explain it, but the look and feel of the environment just screams PS2 game to me. Doesn't this kind of remind you of that one level from Nightfire? Doesn't hurt that we get a double-barrel shotgun here either. Our objective is to track down a briefcase and return it where it's supposed to be. Of course, when we finally find it, the TimeSplitters come out and start chasing us. I really enjoyed the design of the level, except that its confusing layout was making it really hard for me to find where to go. After a while, I finally got it and we completed the level. Most of the levels are really as simple as that. Now we're finally heading 5 years into the future of 2005, where we're bringing down a cyber den. Yeah, remember, this was released in 2000 and technically developed in the late 90s. Back in the year 2000, a lot of people thought we weren't far from stuff like cyber dens being a thing. It's really less of a cyber den and more of like an old dilapidated warehouse. There's nothing really cyber about it. I do enjoy the design though. The tunnels have a cool look to them. Oh, and also we get a chain gun. Now is a good time to bring up that this game actually plays really well. No, really, I love the way it feels to play old shooters like this. It was a little wonky at first, but once I got used to it, I was loving it. Next up, we're heading back in time again to a village in the 1950s, and it is exactly what it sounds like. A small European village, seemingly in the 1950s, and the good news is that the double-barrel shotgun is back. I enjoy the nighttime aesthetic of this level a lot, but it's around this point we start to realize that this game is just the same thing every mission. Our objective is to find a cursed artifact and bring it back for deeper research, which is about as deep as our objectives ever go. One sentence reasons to kill a bunch of creatures. More zombies and thugs and other killable NPCs, but I gotta give respect to one major thing, and that's the lack of reused assets across these levels. There may only be 10 of them, but each one features a unique setting and design. Moving on from the village, we head to 1985 to see a chemical plant. The interesting thing about this level, at least to me, is that it's the most vertical so far. There's a lot of aiming and looking around, which is fitting since we start this round with a sniper rifle. This one really does feel like an old Bond game, just the way it opens and the fact that we're killing some kind of nameless mercenary henchman. Again, totally unique design, and I'm loving it. Although this mission was a lot harder than the ones before it. Once you get the hang of it and familiarize yourself with using the grenade launcher, it's a little easier. From there, we make our way to the distant future of 2020. Yeah, something Corona. We're on an alien planet called Planet X, which is actually a real theory that there's a hidden planet in our solar system with aliens on it. Whether or not this is based on that, I have no idea. The level is really fun, and probably one of the better layouts overall. I enjoy the rocky canyon look, and the green lighting really complements it given green and red are artistic complements. This is also where we get to play with a variety of futuristic alien weapons too. More than I was able to properly handle, to be honest. I couldn't even decide which ones I liked before the level was over. I overall like the lighting in this level the best, and I think this may even be the largest map in the game too. It's definitely the most open of them all. Completing that, we finally get to my favorite level of the whole game, 1965 Mansion. I could just say I'm a Resident Evil fanboy and you'd get why this is my favorite level, but I'm obviously going to elaborate on it a bit more. We start in a dark, dimly lit room surrounded by the undead. Creatures which I mentioned previously, but really shines brightest in this level. They can't die unless you get a headshot and will just keep getting back up over and over. So since they keep spawning in, if you don't dispose of them, you'll get overwhelmed really quickly. And the aesthetic, I mean, come on. The double-barrel shotgun, the red carpeted rooms, the dark claustrophobic spaces, the moonlit night skybox. This is a love letter to old school horror games and an arcade FPS game, and I love it. They went all out too. We've got a hangman's noose outside, a spooky kitchen, and even some underground catacombs to wander through. It's just the best level in my opinion. We're nearing the end of the game now with only 2 levels left, and unfortunately, the next one is the worst in the game. For the penultimate level, we're going to the year 2000, the current year for the game's release, and it's just a docks level. Shipping containers and office buildings, that's about it. This is the only other level of the game where you'll be aiming up a lot to take out snipers, so that's cool. But for such a colorful game, this realistic and minimal location feels incredibly out of place, surrounded by all those other levels anyway. Even the chemical plant, which was also a more modern, realistic looking level, at least had an over-the-top setting and explosions everywhere. Despite getting a grenade launcher in this level, it feels like a recycled multiplayer map from a way more boring shooter. The verticality and open design are probably the only things I really like about this map. I'm thinking maybe they wanted to ground the player to reality in the penultimate level before springing this final mission on us because we're going back to the future. 2035 Spaceways, where we literally play as a robot. This mission dials in the colorful nature of TimeSplitters up to 11. Lasers, robots, hovercars, and a spaceport for tourists. Now we're talking. They went all out on this last mission too, as we fight through a horde of Timesplitter enemies to get our MacGuffin and board a literal rocket ship to escape. It's cartoonish, over the top, and perfect for this era of games. We even get the minigun back, which is easily the best weapon in the game. It's a pretty straightforward mission, and I do love the way they laid it all out. Like I said, I have respect for the level of detail and work that went into creating this many original assets for one game. Boarding the spaceship, we take off, and the credits roll. So, that's TimeSplitters. There's pretty much no story, it's just a series of fun and colorful levels meant to be enjoyed for what they are. Which brings us to what I assume the real appeal of this game was back in the day. TimeSplitters is definitely more of a multiplayer game than a single player one. So, I roped my roommate Sean into hooking up a second controller and rocking some split-screen multiplayer with me. We had some fun, but it was exactly what you'd expect. The same maps from the single player, but with you and a friend up against bots. Given the game's age, there's obviously no online play, but it does support up to 4 different players on split screen. Other than that, there's one more thing we can do to enjoy our time with TimeSplitters. After completing the game, we can go in and do challenges, which are just different requirements for a map to complete it. Like this one, where we shoot 50 zombie heads in under 2 minutes. All of them are pretty much the same thing. Okay, so the big question, is TimeSplitters worth playing for yourself? I'm gonna have to give a difficult answer here and just say no. If you played it back in the day and have some nostalgic ties to it, then of course, it's worth re-experiencing. If you haven't played it before and you're looking for a cool old school FPS shooter from this era to go back and play, however, this probably wouldn't be one I'd recommend. Don't get me wrong, it was fun and I did enjoy my time with it, but there's better games out there that I'd recommend trying over this one, and a lot of them at that. Without a story or narrative of any kind, there's very little to latch onto here, and I just don't think there's enough content to justify the time you'd spend playing it. I've heard the series really picks up with the sequels, so maybe I'll check those out soon. As for TimeSplitters 1, I'm recommending we leave this one on the Retro Room shelf. Welcome back to the Retro Room, everyone. Today we're grabbing 2 games off the shelf once again, Star Wars Starfighter for the PC, and the sort of pseudo-sequel Star Wars Jedi Starfighter for the Sony PlayStation 2. See, I have a serious condition where I can't seem to stay away from old Star Wars content for a reasonable period of time. So here we are again talking about more Star Wars. This franchise is no stranger to flight sims, going back as far as the mid-90s with the more primitive X-Wing and TIE Fighter games. Even though they're on rails, I guess you could count the Rebel Assault games that I covered in a previous video, or even that one Millennium Falcon game with the wacky keyboard controller. I actually had this growing up. Thanks, Mom. Well, today we're looking at the Star Wars Starfighter games. Jedi Starfighter isn't really a sequel to the first Starfighter game's story, but more so the concept and gameplay with a few returning characters. Although both games were really made with console play in mind, I'll be playing the first Starfighter game on PC since it's readily available on Steam and that's the easiest way for most of you watching to experience it if you're interested. As for Jedi Starfighter, there is no PC port of this one, so we'll be running the PlayStation 2 version today. Both of these games were designed and intended to act as tie-in games with the release of the prequel movies, episodes 1 and 2 respectively, with Starfighter set during the events of The Phantom Menace and Jedi Starfighter tying in with Attack of the Clones. Now, before deciding to make this video, I had never played either of these games. I knew of their existence as a kid, but I didn't ever have an interest in the vehicle-based Star Wars games growing up, so I passed on these. Well, as an adult, I have a newfound appreciation for what these kinds of 6th generation titles had to offer back then. Now, I ended up playing all of the first Starfighter game in the first person heads up display because going in, I didn't realize there was a third person option, which I'd have honestly preferred, but I didn't look at any gameplay or screenshots and none of the buttons ever made it go third person, so I just assumed this is how it was meant to be played. I beat it in one day, and by the time I realized it had a third-person mode, I'd already finished up with it, so that's why all of the footage for this one is in first person. The game opens up on a training mission through a canyon on the planet of Naboo. And to my surprise, it's easy to control. I know that is setting a low bar, but after the Rebel Assault games, I'm just glad the ship is reacting to my inputs in a way that I'd expect. The graphics look great for the time period, and I found myself genuinely having fun. Unfortunately, there isn't a way to pause the game, at least not that I found, so when you start a mission, you're in it till the end. The story of Starfighter actually has you bouncing between the perspectives of a few different characters. We open by playing as Riz Dallows, a member of the Naboo Royal Space Fighter Corps, NRSFC for short. He's a young rookie in the midst of being trained by Ezra Till, his superior officer. After the training is done, we get some real action. Heading into space, we once again take control of Riz as he and Ezra escort the Queen of Naboo to meet with representatives from the Trade Federation. This meeting is a trap, it turns out, and mercenaries come out to attack. Although young Riz manages to fend off the mercs long enough for the Queen to escape, his officer, Ezra, is killed by the mercenary leader, and his N1 Starfighter is left derelict in space. I can't really play any of the cutscenes from this game because each one is drowned in licensed John Williams music from the movies. This is a very charming quality of these older Star Wars games, and although I do love it, sometimes it can get annoying, so I'll just have to describe the story to you. Riz's ship ends up being found by a nearby Troidarian scavenger named Reddy, as he opens comms with Riz and ends up helping him aboard. The game does have fully CG cutscenes to its credit, and for their time period, they hold up half well. This is when we switch perspectives to another of our main characters, Vanna Sage. Vanna is a mercenary currently under contract with the Trade Federation and is assisting them in testing out their new Scarab fighters, a mission we get to play that allows some room to kind of get the hang of controlling her ship. Well, during this event, her astromech droid Mod 3 intercepts a transmission about the Trade Federation's involvement with an illegal invasion of Naboo, and her contract is immediately terminated as she is forced to defend herself against multiple hunter-killer droids and various other mercenaries sent to snuff her out. She escapes down to the planet Eos, where she discovers a huge battle droid production facility. A massive shield then encapsulates her, and she's forced to destroy the generators and escape, just barely making out with her life. Her grievances aren't over yet, however, as she returns to the base where she hides out. She had previously captured a Fiorian pirate named Nim, but he escaped in her absence and now threatens to kill her aboard the station she was keeping him at. Thinking quickly, she spits out information about the droid factory she found on Eos, hoping that will buy him off long enough to spare her. It works, but does result in her being left in a cell, trapped until someone finds her. We then take control of the pirate Nim, and the next few missions are from his perspective. You know, even though the N1 was all over the marketing, we only actually get to use it for a couple of missions at the beginning and at the very end of the game. Most of the time we're in these generic-looking pirate vessels. Nim regroups with his pirate allies, and we get to play a mission where we assault a freighter above the planet Locke, before heading to the surface to pillage whatever valuables we can find. This is where the game starts to double the difficulty. Every mission before this one is easy, but every mission from here on out demands your complete focus to get through it. We have to defend our own vessel while destroying an insane amount of Trade Federation forces. I'm talking dozens of tanks and Scarab fighters. But eventually we're able to keep our loot alive and get our pirates off the planet safely. Not without a target on our backs though. The Trade Federation isn't too happy about being pillaged by some random pirates, and sends a strike force on their pirate base of operations. Nim self-destructs the base and flees in defeat, returning to Vanna Sage's station, hoping to get more information about that droid factory on Eos. While all of that was happening, however, Riz and Reddy managed to meet back up with Vanna and free her from her cell. So when Nim arrives expecting to find Vanna still in captivity, he instead finds multiple blasters in his face. From here onward is where the game's real plot actually begins, and we're roughly halfway through the missions, so pretty much half the game is just character backstory. So here we are with our playable characters finally meeting in person. Riz, Reddy, Nim, and Vanna. The four talk it out here and all agree the Trade Federation is becoming a problem and they need to put a stop to it. So they then strategize a series of guerrilla-style attacks that will punch holes in the Trade Federation's ability to mobilize an efficient attack, starting with an assault on that droid production factory located on Eos. This mission takes us back to where Vanna was trapped, only this time we blow the whole facility to hell. Following that, we encounter the beginnings of a blockade, where Reddy comes up with a plan. Disable one of the freighters, board it, and capture the supplies to deliver to the Naboo Royal Guard outpost to assist in their mounting resistance against the invasion. This mission takes a while as we have to grind down the health of several freighters and fight off dozens of droid starfighters, but eventually we shred them down and achieve this plan. With all of this supplies in hand, it becomes a matter of delivering it all to the Naboo forces, and this is the worst mission in the whole game. Maybe it was because I was playing in first person, but the mix of navigating this canyon, fighting off a stupid amount of enemies, all while trying to speed ahead of Reddy's ship because if he gets ahead of you, he dies instantly. It's too much, dude. Okay, so there's only a few missions left in the game after this, and it's the perfect time to talk about the gameplay. I really enjoyed this game. I'd even used the word good to describe it, but there was one disgusting issue that made it almost unplayable for me. When you take damage of any kind, your camera shakes all over the place, especially in narrow paths when you can take damage, lose control of the ship, and... Now, trying to play the game like this was awful. This mechanic was not a good addition and makes sections of the game genuinely unplayable. And I mean, like, you literally cannot play through them. Writing this now with hindsight, however, I've seen what gameplay looks like when playing in third person, like you're supposed to, and it completely rectifies this most glaring problem. So I'll just say, make sure you play in third person. Getting through this mission, we've now got to escort these Naboo boats to an escape ship, and this mission is easy but so beautiful to look at. They really took advantage of the fact that they were making a game set around Naboo because I love this. It looks great. The final two missions are cut and dry, matching up with the grand finale of the first movie. We destroy hordes of tanks and fighters outside the huge bubble shield seen at the end of the first movie. It's a cool sequence, and a really long mission too. Lastly, we face off in the final space battle where I feel they tried to do too much. I'd have been satisfied with a big space battle set around this Trade Federation control ship, but instead, a huge amount of the level is just us flying around inside the ship, blowing out its shields, and tearing things up like Anakin did at the end of the first movie. I feel this took one too many liberties, and takes away from the significance of Anakin's actions and what it meant for the Force to guide him through that scenario in the movie. Not a fan that they managed to share credit with Riz, the random Naboo star pilot rookie. Oh yeah, and the mercenary leader from the second mission who killed your officer, Essra, comes back and taunts your character through the whole battle until you finally kill him. Then that's it. We get a final cutscene where our characters talk about the good they did, and credits roll. I actually really liked this game, but I'm a sucker for Star Wars. As far as flight sims go, there's tons of better ones out there. This one is fun though. Its characters are shallow but sufficient, the settings are enjoyable, and it's always cool to experience other aspects of the galaxy far, far away. So, as I always ask about games on the Retro Room, should you play Star Wars Starfighter? Well, on the one hand, I don't think it's all that special of a game, and that mechanic of shaking your camera around in first person is genuinely game-breaking. On the other hand, that mechanic isn't an issue if you play in third person as intended, and we never see Tatooine in this game, so I'm going to go with yes. If you're into Star Wars, this is a fun little title that you can easily get on Steam, play through in a few short hours, and it's a really fun way to experience new parts of the Star Wars galaxy. Now what about the follow-up, Star Wars Jedi Starfighter? Let's find out. The game brings with it a fresh coat of main menu paint. I'd even go as far as calling it overdone, to be honest. It's a little too much, but whatever. Getting into the game, and we're introduced to a new character on this adventure, Adi Gallia, a Jedi Master tasked with testing out the new Jedi Starfighter prototype. She's a likable character with believable Jedi Master dialogue. A few things to note with Jedi Starfighter. It's a bit longer than the first game, and we only swap between two characters this time, Adi Gallia and Nim, the pirate from the first game. Also like the first game, Jedi Starfighter has its own standalone story that kind of intersects into the main plot of Attack of the Clones, and I genuinely kind of enjoyed it too. With this extended length of game, however, comes a problem that almost plagued the first game but was narrowly avoided, and that's the fact that playing the game gets repetitive and boring before it's over. Star Wars Starfighter is about 3 to 4 hours long. It's a quick in and out of the Star Wars universe that features an intersecting plot with the first movie. Jedi Starfighter, on the other hand, is 5 to 6 hours long. By the time I was in the last 3 missions of this game, I was ready for it to be over. The whole second act of Jedi Starfighter pads its runtime with monotonous missions meant to extend the game's length, and you can tell. Swapping between the two different kinds of starfighters doesn't really help the problem either. Nim's ship plays pretty similar to the first game, but Adigalia's ship is the star of the show, because she can use the Force while flying, in quite questionable ways. She can force lightning other ships, slow down time, use the Force to create a shield around herself, and even emit a powerful Force shockwaves that destroys nearby fighters. This is Starkiller level power. Honestly though, the lightning and time powers are pretty much the only ones I used, with the shockwave being more of a novelty that I had to go out of my way to use. I will say, whoever thought of putting a bullet time mechanic into a Starfighter game deserves a promotion, because I did get a couple of really cool moments in space because of it. So what's the story with this one? Well, like I was saying before, this game mostly focuses on Jedi Master Adigalia and her involvement with Nim and his pirate gang, the Revenants. Reddy plays a pretty big part in the game, but Vanna Sage from the first game only makes a brief appearance near the very end of the game. Riz Gallows, our hero from the first game, is never even mentioned. The big bad guy in this one is Captain Kavik Toth of Saboth Squadron, a group of highly organized mercenaries currently working alongside Count Dooku to develop a highly dangerous weapon called Trihexalon. The game's whole plot revolves around learning about this Trihexalon weapon and defeating Captain Toth and Saboth Squadron for good. Although the game is longer, it's less convoluted than the first game. Its progression is broken into 3 acts. Act 1 covers Adigalia making contact with Nim in the lock system and assisting him with his operation against the Trade Federation. While assisting Nim is when Adigalia ends up protecting a city from a horde of Hex missiles that would have otherwise wiped the whole location off the face of the planet. Unfortunately, unlike the first game, this game's plot is surrounded by nearly irrelevant missions of Nim and his crew just raiding and attacking Trade Federation locations. I feel the game would have benefited immensely from cutting about 3 or 4 of these missions and keeping the game's length to around no longer than 4 or 5 hours. Also,
Nim, remind me to come back later and pick up this scrap. I know a Toydarian on Tatooine who'll pay good credits for this junk. This is the Liberator.
There are a series of like 2 missions that revolve around Nim and his gang usurping control of a giant space cannon, and you get to use this thing to shoot a bunch of ships via orbital bombardment style fire. This part was awesome. And then of course we eventually cross paths with the movie's finale, and much like the first game, we get to fight in the final conflict, that being the Battle of Geonosis, which is cool but drags on a little too long. I did enjoy this mission a lot though. The final battle is epic. We head to orbit and take on the Saboth Squadron fleet head on in one final sequence where Duel of Fates plays for the duration of the mission. This final mission is pretty good the whole time too, as we watch multiple capital ships get blown to stardust while we ourselves fight dozens of fighters. Eventually it all culminates in one final boss battle, which we use the Force to tackle with ease. It's a simple story with a series of simple missions, but highly enjoyable. There's even a few bonus missions in both games too. I didn't mention them because I think they're worth playing for yourself, and I'm not trying to spoil everything, but there's some extra stuff worth checking out. The game even ties into Star Wars Bounty Hunter, a game that I've already covered before with an extensive retrospective. Jango Fett shows up about halfway through the game, and of all people, Longo Two Guns is technically mentioned in the game. Even though it doesn't show up in his Wikipedia appearances, it's very easy to miss. It is there. Overall, I technically preferred playing Jedi Starfighter, but I enjoyed the setting for the first Starfighter more. So, do I think Jedi Starfighter is worth playing? Well, I kinda answered that a minute ago when I said there's some extra things worth checking out, but I'm going with yes. I had a good amount of fun playing through these, and if you're a Star Wars fan looking to get back into that galaxy far, far away from a fresh perspective, the Starfighter games are a great, albeit flawed, avenue to take. They're both fairly short and low commitment, both have half-decent stories to tell with fun and colorful characters to experience. If you're not a fan of flight sims or games that focus solely on vehicular combat, then this probably isn't a good choice for you. Overall though, I thought it was a fun experience, and I'm glad I took the time to play through them. Of the 4 available Star Wars games on the Nintendo 64, this one may very well be the best. Welcome back to the Retro Room, everyone, and today we're pulling the fan favorite Star Wars Rogue Squadron off the shelf. Released December 3rd, 1998, Star Wars Rogue Squadron was developed by Factor 5 in collaboration with LucasArts, who also published the game. Although it was marketed for and remembered as a Nintendo 64 title, it was also released for PC on disc. I even owned a copy back as a kid, and I loved it then too. The design of this game was actually inspired by the opening level of Shadows of the Empire, where the player takes control of a snowspeeder for a level, as we've covered previously in my Shadows of the Empire retrospective. It was that level that gave Factor 5 the idea for a whole game in that fashion, and they pitched it to LucasArts, who approved and greenlit the project. Although I opted to cover the PC port of Shadows of the Empire, I chose to play through this one using N64 emulation with a USB N64 controller, keeping it authentic. Graphically, for a game that's nearly 25 years old, it looks spectacular. They were really pushing the limits of what this console was capable of. I mean, this was nearing the end of the N64's lifespan. The Sony PlayStation had come out at this point, and Metal Gear Solid was already on the market. With over a dozen unique planets across 16 levels, this is easily one of the more impressive looking titles available on the N64. This was achieved thanks to the Nintendo expansion pack, allowing the game to render at a higher resolution than it normally would. It isn't necessary to run the game, but it does make it look nicer. As for the levels, most of them look pretty similar. It's normally just some rocky terrain with the occasional outpost area. Some levels try to be a bit more ambitious, like Corellia, which shows some city structures. It's cool for the time, and I like that it feels so vast and exciting. This is something a lot of these other vehicle-based Star Wars games have missed the mark on. Even the Starfighter games, which would come several years later, only showed roughly 5 planets per game. Granted, I think the idea was quality over quantity, but it didn't really translate well because the levels there looked roughly the same as the levels here, only nicer because they were on a PS2 as opposed to the N64. Speaking of running on an N64, let's talk about how this game handles on an N64 controller. I'd say it feels natural and responds really well. The controller is pretty infamous for its strange 3-pronged design, but the ships react as you would expect for the most part. Despite it having a PC release, you can tell it was designed and intended for the Nintendo 64, which isn't a bad thing because, like I said, Factor 5 really killed it on the optimization of these controls. The game was mostly designed by Factor 5, but LucasArts was involved pretty heavily across the game's development, and one of their primary contributions was to the game's narrative. Reps from LucasArts handled the game's story and ensured it didn't contradict any of the pre-established canon, and that it was compelling and exciting. So let's talk about that narrative. Although the game was released in 1998, the concept of Rogue Squadron already existed, and was featured in the immensely popular Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn. The concept had then spun off into its own series of books called Star Wars X-Wing. The first of the 10-book series was aptly titled Star Wars X-Wing Rogue Squadron. However, every one of those 10 books and the Thrawn novels all take place after the 6th movie, Return of the Jedi, while this game actually takes place between episodes 4 and 5 during Luke's brief tenure with Rogue Squadron before going on to become a Jedi. Speaking of, Luke is our player character for this title, and it's really cool to play as him in a new story. There are a surprisingly low amount of games that let you play as Luke across a series of single-player missions, and you'll never guess where our story starts.
Good morning, Wedge. The rest of Rogue Squadron is still back at base, but I thought we could take an early morning run through Beggar's Canyon.
Fortunately, this is the only level on Tatooine, not counting the bonus level, so there's still tons of interesting planets we get to visit later. I love Star Wars Legends, so it doesn't need a very strong story to pull me in for a game like this. That being said, Rogue Squadron does have a half-decent story actually, but it's nothing super crazy. The game centers around 3 main acts, with the plot of the first act showing the defection of Imperial officer Crix May-Dean to the Rebel Alliance. Casual fans may remember this character from his appearance in Return of the Jedi, and he plays a central role in the plot of this game. There's even a whole mission on Corellia where we fight to save General Madine from an Imperial attack to kill him, which was one of my favorite missions. Han Solo even shows up to help us fight.
Han, Chewie, well, what are you doing here?
How you doing, kid? Thought I might give you a hand. This is my hometown, after all.
Following this, the player attacks a moon with Madine heading up as leader of Gold Squadron in a Y-Wing. It's here where we shoot down an Imperial TIE interceptor with a pilot named Kason Moore.
It's from Gold Squadron.
This is Lieutenant Kason Moore of the Imperial 128th to Unidentified Y-Wing. Are you quite done? My vehicle has been disabled for a good 2 minutes now.
Kason Moore, consider yourself a prisoner of the Rebel Alliance.
Well, if you quit shooting at me, I have a proposal to make. One which would serve us all.
Shortly after being taken prisoner by the rebels, she offers to defect to the rebel side and give them information regarding the location of 3 critical Imperial bases. She then joins the rogues as a member and assists them in their assault on those bases. While attacking an enclave on Kylie 2, however, Wedge gets shot down and taken prisoner by the Imperials.
Look, it's an ambush. I don't know where they came from. I don't have nav control anymore. You can't? Yes, great. Main computer offline. Targeting computer offline. Ah, we just off road 7. I can't... Get out of there, Wedge. Copy, what happened? Wedge made it. He's gonna be captured for sure. I'm under a lot of fire. Increase speed, full throttle. Hold on, Wedge.
Well, the rogues can't just let one of their best be sent to the spice mines of Kessel, so they mount a rescue mission with information on what train he'll be on and when. After a successful rescue mission, our main antagonist is revealed to be one Moff Cole Searden. A pretty generic bad guy, to be honest. He's got your uptight Imperial demeanor, your typical Royal British accent, and a few sinister-sounding one-liners.
Greetings, Commander Skywalker. So you're the young man who destroyed the Death Star. Moff Searden. Do you wish to surrender now, or can I destroy you?
What follows are a series of back-and-forth attacks between the rogues and the Moff. The rogues save some Bacta tanks on the planets of Talaran and Fest, while Searden attacks a major city on the planet of Chandrilla. This all leads to a penultimate level where we're flying around in a Y-Wing on Celeste, trying not to be killed by the dozens of different missiles all chasing behind us. This was all a diversion, however, as we're told by General Riken that Moff Searden is storming a rebel base on Typhera. This ends up being the final chapter of the main story, as we fight off the last of Searden's Imperial units and face him down in a final boss battle. It's a short and sweet, self-contained Star Wars story that fits snugly right between episodes 4 and 5. I really quite liked it, to be honest. There's even an added level that acts as an epilogue to the main story, where we time skip to 6 years past the Battle of Endor and play as Wedge Antilles as we take down a handful of massive world devastators from the Imperial Remnant during an attack on Mon Calamari. This might actually be the coolest mission. As I talked about earlier, this game actually feels fantastic to play. It responds to your inputs as you'd expect and controls very smoothly. Each vehicle even feels totally different and unique as well. They all have different firing modes, different speeds, boosts, durability, and special features. Our most common vehicle is, of course, the iconic X-Wing. It's probably the vehicle you'll be in the most, but that's okay because it's the best one of the default vehicles. It's not as fast as the A-Wing, but it's got more durability, and it's significantly faster than the Y-Wing. It's got multiple different firing modes and a handful of proton torpedoes for taking out land turrets or AT-STs. Every vehicle has a boost and a slow function, but the X-Wing actually has a secondary boost that doubles the movement speed entirely. We can engage this by closing our S-foils, which means we can't fire and it makes it harder to move, but it's very useful for closing gaps between you and another fighter. The A-Wing is the second most common fighter you'll use, and although you'll notice it moves faster than the X-Wing, as I mentioned before, it is also a lot less durable, so you really need to be careful how much damage you're incurring while piloting this one. No special boost, and we get missiles instead of proton torpedoes. But it's a very fun vehicle to fly. Feels like it's a paper plane sometimes, though. The third vehicle you'll use the most is the Speeder. It controls similarly to the X-Wing in terms of speed and durability, but without missiles or the S-foil boost. However, it does come with a tow cable, which of course we use to take down AT-ATs. You always know there's going to be Imperial walkers in a level if you're flying one of these. It's a cool mechanic, and of course this little mechanic in Shadows of the Empire is what inspired Factor 5 to pursue developing Rogue Squadron, so it's fitting we use it as often as we do. Finally, you've got the Y-Wing. It's slow, and it fires lasers like a bantha runs. Slow. It's cool to have this vehicle in the game, and it does come equipped with bombs, which are very useful in a few instances, but I just wish it was more fun to play these levels. Fortunately, they're pretty infrequent, so you won't have to suffer them for very long. The remaining ships are not really part of the main campaign, with the exception of the V-Wing, which you only use in the final level following the time skip. I do like the inclusion, but it's honestly a nightmare to control. It flies too fast, shoots too slow, and doesn't even look very cool. V-Wings in general are just not my favorite ships. Without cheats, that's all we get. But we're going to throw in a few passcodes and take a look at some of the hidden vehicles. Entering in cheat codes, we unlock 3 hidden bonus levels and a few additional vehicles. So let's cover 2 at once. The first bonus level features the T-16 Skyhopper making the Beggar's Canyon run on Tatooine. It's a fun little addition, but of course it's not really all that fun to play. You're just navigating the canyon with Luke's friends. I'm glad it's here because I think it might be the highest quality way to make the Beggar's Canyon run in a game. The third level is just the Death Star Trench Run. Very cool, but more of just a novelty than anything else. And the third and final hidden level is the Battle of Hoth. I, again, love the inclusion for the novelty, but realistically, it's just repeating the tow cable mechanic like 3 times in a row. Still love that it's there though. Some other hidden content includes the Millennium Falcon, a TIE Interceptor, an AT-ST limited to 1 small bonus level, and the N1 Starfighter. The Falcon is a monster. It's overpowered, has auto-locking, and takes way more damage than any of the other ships. Playing the levels with this ship is akin to just cheating, but it's still so much fun. The Interceptor feels similar to the A-Wing or the V-Wing, except it has no shields, so flying it feels like you're made of paper. And the bonus level is actually pretty fun. This might be the earliest instance of a Star Wars game letting you control an Imperial AT-ST like this, so that's cool. Of course, all of these require cheat codes to access, but the N1 actually requires 2 cheat codes in a row and doesn't give you any indication you found it because the developers were hoping to keep its inclusion a secret until after the release of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, which would release several months after Rogue Squadron released. The team worked with LucasArts to include the ship's design in the game early before the movie dropped. It's also fun to play with and feels like such a novelty to be included. Man, it would have been cool to have had Cognizance back when the prequel movies were releasing, but I was too young to remember The Phantom Menace. I remember seeing Attack of the Clones in theaters, and of course Revenge of the Sith, but those are the earliest ones and I was still so young. The N1 is actually the best starfighter, and the best ship other than the Falcon. It's got the speed of the V-Wing, but maybe a little slower, the durability of the X-Wing, the fire capabilities of the A-Wing, and the seeker missiles of the Falcon. Of course, they did this because it was the new ship for the new exciting movie, and this ship is not nearly this powerful in-universe. A final note is that Rogue Squadron actually had a composer come in and do some original tunes for this game. There are motifs from the Williams scores littered all throughout the game, but there are some original tracks too, which really helps this game to stand out as something unique compared to games that just relied on music from the movies for the whole game. Well, we're at that big question now. Is Rogue Squadron worth playing? In case I hadn't been clear throughout this video, the answer is a definitive yes. I highly recommend this game to anyone who enjoys retro games, Star Wars games, or flying games. In fact, I think this may even be the best Star Wars game I've shown on this channel yet. I may even recommend this over any of the other Star Wars games I've talked about. And there's really no excuse not to play it because Rogue Squadron is readily available on Steam right now for a very reasonable price of $10 without a sale. I even booted it up myself just to make sure it ran with ease, and it didn't need any external work from me to make it launch. Just hit download, install, and play. That being said, the game does have a few downsides, the biggest of them being the life system. If you die 3 times on a mission, you have to restart the mission all over, which seems harmless at first, but really starts to get annoying on the last 3 missions when missiles and TIE interceptors are spamming you endlessly, and it does kind of start to suck the fun out of it. It is more than possible to beat the game as intended, however, and I practically did. But after getting to the final boss and dying, I did turn on infinite lives so I could just finish the experience and get this video done. So there's always that as an option as well. This difficulty spike doesn't come anywhere close to the spikes or issues we've seen pop up in the other Star Wars titles so far though, like Bounty Hunter or Shadows of the Empire. All in all, Rogue Squadron is a fantastic accomplishment, and I feel totally comfortable saying that it's among the very best of the games available for the Nintendo 64.
Ah, Herr Fortescue, you are back on the battlefield, yeah? This is good. People say to me, Stungard, what do you think of this sword or that axe? But I say to them, nein! Modern warfare is a question of science, the science of shields!
Happy Halloween and welcome back to the Retro Room. Since my massive Dead Space video is handling the genuine scary part of Halloween month this year, I figured I'd find a game on the Retro Room shelf to cover with a more fun and silly, scary aesthetic to cover my bases. So today we're talking about the PS1 classic, MediEvil. Beginning development in 1995, the development team at SCE Studio Cambridge were calling the game Dead Man Dan. The team had begun development of the game as a more arcade-styled game for Windows and the Sega Saturn until Sony bought the developer outright and shifted development for publishing on the Sony PlayStation instead. Along with this change came also a change in the style of gameplay, shifting it from an arcade shooter to an action-adventure hack-and-slash. How it was going to be a shooter, I have no idea, but we know for sure that the game underwent a lot of changes following Sony's purchase of the studio. Looking at the style, we can tell that the game is an aesthetic work of art. The studio was heavily influenced by Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas for the game's style, and it shows. They took that Tim Burton style, made it interactive and unique, then doubled down on the Halloween theme. Then, fittingly, the game was released in October of 1998. Now, I have some childhood memories of this game, but the weird thing is, I can't remember when they're from. I remember I owned this game for a very brief period of time, but I can't remember when that was. I was very young, and I'm almost positive I didn't even own a PlayStation when I had this game, because I don't remember ever playing more than the first level, and I know I didn't have a PS1 when I was young. So I'm pretty sure a friend gave me the game, or I found it at a thrift store or something, yet couldn't really play it. So I was kind of hyped to go in and finally experience this game for the first time. And what better time than Halloween month? It's a very simple game, which I think works to its credit. One could clearly and quickly piece together that this game was designed with children in mind, but in such a way that adults could enjoy it as well. I say that, but the difficulty is actually kind of insane, but we'll get into that later. The plot is simple, the combat is simple, even the levels are simple. The one thing that's not simple is the aesthetic design, but all of the game's simplicity actually works to its benefit, I think. Jumping into playing it feels easy and fun, learning new mechanics as they're presented is fluid, and the story is told with a great flow. One thing I really love about the game's design is how they handle the level progression. Each time you complete a level, you're pulled into a full map of Galamir, the name of the land the game is set in, and you have to move forward, right, left, and diagonal to select notable locations that you'll be visiting next. This is such a clever way to handle a level select screen, and I love it. It makes us feel like we're traveling from one location to the next throughout the land. I've seen things like this in a few other titles, but it's not something you really see anymore, and it's a very cool method of moving between levels. Each level tends to have a unique look and feel to it, having to do with where it is in Gallowmere. We'll see all kinds of crazy things, from graveyards to trap-laden wheat fields, pumpkin patches, crystal caves, insane asylums, and even a ghost ship. This game truly is made for Halloween. In between each of these levels is a sort of hub area called the Hall of Heroes. It's technically optional, and you pretty much never have to go there, but each level has an object called a chalice, which can only be collected upon defeating all enemies in that level. Once the chalice has been collected, you will be sent to the Hall of Heroes. There, we can interact with the conscious statues of past heroes who all have something to say and something to give. It's a really neat little hub, and let me just say, if you're playing this without cheats, I'm pretty sure you're going to need every chalice. Or most of them at least, because the items you get here are crucial. If you wanted to play through this game without collecting anything from the Hall of Heroes, you'd essentially be playing through the whole thing with the weakest and worst weapons in the game. Which I'm sure is possible if you're like really good at the game. If you're just playing it for the first time, however, like me, it's really difficult to get the swing of things, and you'll end up playing a lot of these missions multiple times trying to beat them. The story is actually really unique and fun. You play as the resurrected skeleton of Sir Daniel Fortescue, a brave and venerable knight who, selected by the King of Gallowmere himself, led the king's army into battle against the wicked sorcerer Zarek. Fighting against the evil armies and facing down the archvillain, Daniel fought and defeated Zarek in combat before eventually succumbing to his devastating wounds. Or so the false legend goes. The truth is revealed shortly after we start the game. Daniel was selected as champion and did lead the King of Gallomere's army into battle. He did not, however, face down Zarek. In fact, he never even saw combat. Sir Daniel was struck in the eye by the very first arrow fired and died instantly before the battle ever even began. After his death, however, the king covered up the events, declaring Sir Daniel Fortescue the hero of Gallowmere, which would normally mean his soul was sent to the Hall of Heroes, but since this is untrue, that never happened. Well, part of the lie was that Zarek himself was also killed, but in actuality, he simply went into hiding to grow his power until now, when he summons a spell to cast Eternal Night onto the land of Gallowmere, and summon the army of the undead to serve his bidding as he seeks to steal the souls of the living and conquer the kingdom. This process ends up resurrecting Sir Daniel as well though, and with his missing jaw and eye, Daniel sees a chance to hunt down and destroy Zarek for good, proving to all that although he isn't the legend everyone thought he was, he is still indeed worthy of being called a hero. So with his sword in hand, Dan marches out of his crypt and plunges through the armies of the undead towards the sorcerer Zarek to save the enspelled residents of Gallowmere who can't fight for themselves and earn his place as a true hero. I've got to admit, I've never really seen a story like this anywhere. It's so original. The character of Dan is lovable too, though he has very little to say, often falling back on just 2 or 3 lines. All of which he can't even actually enunciate because he's missing his jaw, leaving it sounding like just mumbling. All of this is told through the vehicles of some, quite frankly, underwhelming gameplay. I recognize this game is very old, so I'll try to be a little kinder with that in mind, but even still, it's overly complicated in some areas and overly simplified in others. The core gameplay loop is a mix of action-adventure hack and slash with elements of platforming and puzzles. Most levels will feature some small element of platforming and around 1 to 3 different puzzles to solve on average. More if you're trying for the chalice. The movement is stiff, but I won't hold that against it. 3D games were still very new in this era, and teams were still figuring it out. That being said, the combat boils down to mashing either X or square, essentially alternating between a main light attack and a heavier attack that gets more powerful as it charges. It's fun enough on the surface, but doesn't really feel all that good to play. And on top of that, the enemy AI design makes the creatures you face sometimes way faster than you, and it ends up being a massive pain to tackle. You get a variety of ranged weapons that can make it easier, but this is at the cost of enjoyment, as spamming daggers or arrows feels even less satisfying than just mashing the sword to break your enemies up close. It got easier when I realized that health pools refill your life vials in addition to just your HP if you remain standing on them. Even still, the combat just isn't great. The platforming is even worse. I think the puzzles ended up being the most enjoyable part of the game, but not by much. They were a nice little distraction and added to the experience, but I wasn't crazy about them either. Now, one of MediEvil's strengths is the music. Composed by Andrew Barnabas and Paul Arnold, the OST nails that charm of a whimsical Halloween adventure. It's really an art form in itself to make music that's fun and nice to listen to, but that's short and can loop endlessly without grating on the player's nerves. Most of the tracks we hear throughout the game are great little background melodies that contribute to the game's atmosphere in a positive way. All that said, the game was released to great reception. Most people who played it really enjoyed the experience and had a lot of positive ratings to offer. The primary criticisms back then weren't so different from my own, regarding the controls mainly. Since then, MediEvil has seen one sequel, which was also released for the PS1, one reimagining for the PSP in 2005, and a more widely known total remake for the PlayStation 4. None of which I have played as of now, but all look decent enough. Drop a comment to let me know if they're worth checking out. So, do I think MediEvil is worth going back and playing for yourself? Man, this is probably the hardest one of these I've had to do yet. On the one hand, this game has so much interesting stuff to offer between its design, story, and atmosphere. On the other hand, the worst part of the game is the way in which players are expected to experience those things, the actual game itself. I love the lore of Galamir, the fascinating tale of Sir Daniel, the fun and inspired art style, and just the overall concept. But the game itself is just so lackluster, and I didn't ever find myself actually enjoying my time with the game while playing it. It's such a shame. If you have nostalgia for it, or are desperate for a Halloween game, then I think it might be worth going back and taking a look. But that's not the point of this show. The point is to try old games, since new ones have become so lackluster, and offer insight onto some great old gems that I can encourage people to go back and play. Because of that, I'm going to have to say no. MediEvil is not worth going back and trying for yourself. It was a difficult decision because I really did love everything about this game, except for, well, the game itself, which is really the most important part. But for MediEvil, I'm gonna have to say we leave this one on the Retro Room shelf. Hey, thanks for watching, everyone. I'm always so thrilled when we can go back and give these old titles a little bit of spotlight. With it being Halloween, this one just felt like the game to cover, and overall, I'm glad I did. If you're looking for something a bit scarier and maybe longer, be sure to head over to my nearly 2.5-hour retrospective of the original Dead Space. And as we move into the new year, I'm always happy to take suggestions on what games to cover next. Thanks everyone, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, that's all I've got for you. Released in December of the year 2000 for the N64, and later in March for the PC as well, this Episode 1 tie-in is a pretty interesting one. There are several really good tie-in games for Episode 1, one of which we've looked at already in the form of Star Wars Starfighter, a game that's actually kinda similar to this one in a few ways, which we'll get to. And this was actually the second game to be officially titled with the Episode 1 moniker. The first being Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, a game I'll be covering very soon, but there were several others as well. But what makes this one stand out from the other Episode 1 tie-ins is that it's the only one to attempt a mix of both land vehicle, sea vehicle, and air vehicle missions. That's right, Factor 5 decided to try and expand on potential mission variety by including both land and sea vehicles for this one, which was probably a smart gambit considering the entire game is set on Naboo, which is another thing that separates this game from its sibling tie-ins, as it's the only one to be set entirely on Naboo with no other locations ever appearing outside of bonus missions. A far cry from its spiritual predecessor, Rogue Squadron, which featured over a dozen different planets across its main campaign. I'll be comparing Battle for Naboo to Rogue Squadron pretty much the whole time. I mean, this game feels more like an expansion pack to Rogue Squadron than a legitimate sequel, honestly, which is why I feel like I'll have to compare. If you haven't watched my Rogue Squadron video, I'd recommend checking that one out before or after you finish this to add some context to where I'm coming from. Now, I always like to have a section early on in these videos about if I have any experience with the game I'm talking about prior to my playing it to cover it here. And something I'll say is I didn't know that I did until I played it. When I decided to cover it, I genuinely didn't think I really knew anything about it beyond the title and concept. I don't remember when I played it, and I'm nearly positive I did not ever own it. But upon starting up that first mission, I knew I'd seen it before. I don't remember when or where, but I know that at some point in my childhood I have played this game. I have to tell you, it's a very odd sensation to have a memory triggered that you can't place at all. I recognize the opening level, but don't know when or where from. Aside from that, however, I was really going in blind. Now, believe it or not, after doing some research, this game actually does a lot to both add to and stay faithful to the movie and its canon. Throughout the game, we play as Gavin Sykes, which is spelled like a 2008 MySpace Screamo artist. Gavin is a lieutenant of the Royal Naboo Security Force, much like Riz Dallos from Star Wars Starfighter. Unlike Riz, however, Gavin actually plays a substantial role in other Star Wars media. Well, the Legends media, not so much the Disney media, because they threw away thousands of hours of people's work and passion from across multiple decades to replace it with their own canon. But back in the Legends media, we can see just how prominent our boy Gavin was. Not only was he actually in The Phantom Menace, but he also shows up in Galactic Battlegrounds, Star Wars Galaxies, and even the aforementioned Star Wars Starfighter, mentioned only as Bravo 6 though. His role is probably the most interesting in Galaxies, where he played a prominent role during the Galactic Civil War, even helping to stop a deadly bioweapon from being released and killing millions. Here, however, we see his humble origins as a young hotshot thrust into the throes of a droid invasion. Just like in Rogue Squadron, Factor 5 and LucasArts have teamed up to give us a wholly original story that coincides with the movie directly. And while it's a little less complicated than Rogue Squadron, I feel it has a lot to add to your enjoyment of the movie. Starting off, we assume control of Gavin during the fall of Theed, playing as we escape the occupation with our ally, Captain Kale, and try to help out with the countryside citizens of Naboo. From there, the RNSF tries to regroup and formulate some kind of resistance to the ongoing droid occupation. During that time, we save a vessel being attacked by the Trade Federation belonging to Borvo the Hutt, who offers to ally himself with us as repayment for saving his ship. So with added resources and allies, we launch a direct offensive on the Trade Federation to cripple their forces and rescue Naboo hostages which are being used as slaves. But in a twist no one could have seen coming, Borvo outright betrays us, and we have to fight off his forces along with the Trade Federation's occupying force. The first and third acts are dedicated to fighting the Trade Federation, but the second act is mostly given to fighting and defeating Borvo the Hutt and his forces, which ended up being one of the most notable parts of the story for me. They don't know who they're messing with. Gavin Sykes is in Her Majesty's royal service. All of this is what is happening while Padme is on Coruscant pleading to the Galactic Senate for help. When she returns to retake Theed, Sykes and the remaining RNSF forces rally behind her to essentially play out the final events of the movie, even allowing us to play the final assault on Voltan Pala, the big circular droid control ship we see Anakin destroy in the movie. The penultimate level inside of Theed is arguably the most ambitious level between both this and Rogue Squadron, to be honest. It's dense and really detailed. I feel like this game even does better justice to the final battle from the movie than Starfighter did. Even though that one was way better graphically and scale-wise, this one didn't try to make our protagonist more than he was, and we hear Anakin when he comes flying out and see the ship start to blow up. It's a tighter-knit story than most of the other Star Wars games I've seen so far, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't get a kick out of getting to play the events on Naboo we didn't see in the movie between when Padme escaped Naboo and when she returned. Whereas a lot of these games take place vaguely between the events of certain movies, this one can be pinpointed so specifically within The Phantom Menace that it really feels like we're playing a genuine companion piece to the film, even so far as seeing our player character in the movie, which is awesome. Now, I really don't talk about graphics in my videos unless I'm praising them or talking about how good they are. Criticizing something like that isn't my thing, and I don't typically care how bad graphics are if I'm having fun. But I'm happy to point out if the graphics do go above and beyond. This is sort of a special instance though, because the graphics aren't just bad, they look worse than the game they're following up in some cases. Somehow, Battle for Naboo manages to look worse than Rogue Squadron in a lot of ways, despite coming 2 years after. There are some parts of it that look better, like the lighting and maybe the textures. The new particle effects they introduced are really cool, like rain and snow, and the draw distance is way further, which makes things feel more immersive. But the explosions for some reason look way worse, like a green screen preset. They looked similar in Rogue Squadron, but way less apparent for some reason. And the most unforgivable part? What the hell is this? Are you kidding me? Is this really the best they could do? I get 3D was a new technology at the time, but are you telling me they couldn't model a 3D character model for this speeder? This paper thing looks just awful. I'm not alone either, as this was a point of criticism upon the game's release actually. I just don't believe it had to be this way. I really think if they'd wanted to, they could have modeled something here instead of using paper textures. Like, who thought this would be okay? Moving on to the gameplay, you'll see it is very similar to Rogue Squadron, so I'll tell you now, if you like Rogue Squadron or if this gameplay looks fun to you, then you'll probably like this game. It's that simple. That being said, although this game takes place exclusively on or around Naboo, don't be fooled into thinking that the environments aren't varied. Between the multiple different vehicles we have, 3 different biomes we get to see, and the inclusion of space battles, which were notably absent from Rogue Squadron, Battle for Naboo might actually be more varied than its predecessor. Although we mostly see the standard fare beautiful paradise planet aesthetic of Naboo, across a few levels we do get to see snow, a swamp, and of course space. So it's varied enough, especially when you take into account that you'll be switching between land, sea, and air vehicles across these levels. One very impressive new feature is that some levels have hangars where you can swap seamlessly between land or air vehicles during the mission, which is pretty awesome, honestly. And it's a feature that pays off as they use it several times to take you straight from dogfighting in the air to a totally different style of vehicle combat. We already know the aerial gameplay is gold. I covered that in the Rogue Squadron video. So what about the new ground and water combat? Well, the ground combat is awesome. Each time I got to do it, I was thrilled and had a blast. There's really only 3 vehicles to choose from between 2 speeders and a staff, at least by default, with a very clear hierarchy of which one is better than the other. But all 3 of them are very fun to play with. As for the sea-based combat, I won't sugarcoat it, it sucks. Like, it's bad. The most offensive issue is that the aiming straight up doesn't work, and auto-aim can't save it. The default aim is like an inch too high to shoot anything in front of you, and a few inches too low to take out turrets positioned above you. It's really an awful experience. There's only one boat to control, and it doesn't even look cool to play. The whole dynamic is terrible, and it damages the experience overall. Fortunately, I think there's only 2 missions where you're in this thing, and only 1 of them where you're in it for the whole mission, so it's not too bad. There's pretty much the same number of missions as Rogue Squadron, but several of them feel way shorter, so I think I completed this game faster than when I played Rogue Squadron, but let me tell you, it's, for some strange reason, way harder. I don't know why, but they upped the difficulty or something, because about halfway through it, it gets insanely hard to avoid taking damage. So just be aware of that if you're planning to go play it. Now earlier, I said the game takes place mostly on Naboo. That's because just like Rogue Squadron, we have a few bonus levels to look at. There's 3 bonus levels to unlock, and there are a number of cool little secrets you can find across the levels, or cheats to try if you're inclined. The first of the levels is pretty bland, I feel. You're protecting a Republic transport as it leaves with a bunch of files from a Trade Federation base. It's not very noteworthy, I feel. The second 2 are where it's at. Coruscant encounter has us flying through the high-rise streets of the city planet, chasing Darth Maul's Sith infiltrator as we attempt to shoot him down. It's pretty insane, but really fun. Makes me wonder, how have we not gotten more modern games that let us fly through the streets of Coruscant like this before now? Then, the last hidden mission is probably the coolest. We get to control Darth Maul and his Sith infiltrator as we cut through dozens of Naboo forces, destroy farms and buildings, leaving this Naboo countryside in burning ashes, which, after spending so many levels trying to keep these things safe, is admittedly a little cathartic. All in all, some very unique and fun extras that probably made trying to get those gold and silver medals all the more worth it back in the day. Earlier on the channel, I did a video on the Starfighter games, and something a lot of you may notice is that there are some striking similarities between this and Star Wars Starfighter, but let me assure you, they're very different games. For one, I feel like the story in this one is better than in Starfighter, and that there's more to see and do too. There were more characters in Starfighter, and there was a much stronger attempt at a real story, even taking the player away from Naboo for most of the game. But it ended up just feeling strange and out of place to me, and I don't think the multiple perspective jumps to different characters helped either. In Battle for Naboo, the story may not look as pretty or have any cutscenes, but it's far more concise, equally as interesting, and we play as the same character from start to finish. Not to mention, you only ever control fighters in Starfighter, naturally. So although the two games may look similar and share the N1 Starfighter on the cover, rest assured that they are two very different games. As mentioned before, Battle for Naboo has significantly more in common with Rogue Squadron than it does Starfighter. The music was once again handled by Rudolf Stember, but unlike Rogue Squadron, this game really doesn't have a musical identity of its own. Nearly all of the music you'll hear is directly from the movie, although it's been rewritten into Factor 5's Musi-X sound driver so it sounds more video gamey. All of the melodies are very clearly all taken directly from The Phantom Menace, which, to be honest, fits. This game is a side story that takes place directly alongside the events of the movie, so I'm fine that it shares its identity that much closer. It's all great, of course, but I mean, it's John Williams, so stands to reason it would be. The game's reception was unfortunately quite telling. While it received mostly positive reviews, pretty much all of the criticism was aimed at the lack of innovation for gameplay, the lower quality music not holding up to other games on the market at the time, and the graphics. Though they were apparently pretty mixed on those issues from what I read, the game's PC port was significantly less appreciated, being given what amounts to a 5.5 out of 10 average when I looked. Okay, so, the question. Is Battle for Naboo worth pulling and trying out for yourself? Well, overall the game has a lot to offer and a very fun package. Star Wars fan or not, this is still one of the better N64 games I've played, and the extra context for the movie's plot was just an added treat for me. So, if you haven't been able to guess from that alone, the answer is a very simple yes. I wouldn't really call it like a resounding yes, but it is good and I had fun. I am comfortable saying this one is worth checking out. I feel like it's in the shadow of Rogue Squadron in a lot of people's minds for all kinds of reasons, but make no mistake, it's every bit as exciting and worth playing as Rogue Squadron is. Released in May 1999, just 2 days after The Phantom Menace hit theaters, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer is a racing game, obviously, based off of the pod racing sport we see introduced in the movie it was tying into. The game was developed for the Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, Microsoft Windows, Macintosh, and the Game Boy Color? I mean, that's basically a different game. There was a PS1 port announced to be in development, but it never saw release, and I couldn't find any information as to why. My guess is the console was nearing the end of its life cycle. Racer was headed up by Star Wars legend John Knowles, and several other prominent developers from LucasArts who had just wrapped up development on Shadows of the Empire when they began working alongside the movie's production crew to try and create a game based on the movie's pod racing concept. Originally, the game was even supposed to be called Star Wars Pod Racer, but apparently some other company owned the trademark for any game with the word pod in the title, so in the end, they settled on just calling it Episode 1 Racer. It's a little strange. I feel like I remember it being called Star Wars Pod Racer, like I've been hit with the Mandela effect or something, because I had this game as a kid on the PC. I can literally remember having this exact case. But for some reason, my brain always thought it said Pod Racer, Either way, I loved this game as a kid. Playing through the new levels and seeing all these new planets was exciting. Not to mention all of the bizarre and interesting pod racers we can unlock. For this video, we're looking at the N64 version of the game, which is pretty much the same as the other versions, except just like Shadows of the Empire, all of the pre-rendered cutscenes have been removed. The cartridge just couldn't handle them. Racer has a very typical racing game structure featuring 4 different tournaments to play through, each more difficult than the last, with increasingly challenging environments to navigate and try to race through. Let me just say, the learning curve between the first and second tournament is pretty substantial, and they get harder every new circuit. Really, the only way to keep up with the difficulty spikes is to constantly be upgrading your pod racer or just keep swapping to new vehicles and racers altogether, of which there is a surprisingly eclectic selection. And by that, I mean there's 25 total racers to pick from, 23 unlockable without cheats. That is kind of a lot of pod racers. Among them are some recognizable characters like Anakin or Sebulba, and a bunch of other characters we did see briefly in the first movie, all of which you can play as, and most of which have the same voice actors from the movie, including Anakin, properly voiced by Jake Lloyd. As mentioned earlier, there's a way to upgrade your different pod racers thanks to Watto's shop, where you can buy parts new, or head out back to the junkyard to see if he's got any parts for cheaper. And true to the film, Republic credits are no good here, only money, which in Tatooine terms means their on-planet currency, Trugets. Speaking of Tatooine, the first level of the game takes place there on the Boonta Eve course. Also, there is no narrative or storyline to speak of this time around, because the real star of the show is the different planets and racetracks you'll get to visit and play on. We get to visit 8 different planets across the 4 main circuits, but each time you visit a planet, the track has changed, oftentimes being expanded to be even longer and with more various different paths to take. Seriously, some of the coolest planets aren't even available until you get to the 2nd and 3rd circuits, which in order to progress you'll have to place at least 3rd on every level to see the next course, which, depending on the track, can actually end up being pretty difficult.
Anakin! How many times I told you? Stay away from hard couplings! That was good.
You may even recognize some of these planets if you've been with my channel for a while, as we'll race on both Malastare.
They're pod racing on Malastare. Very fast, very dangerous.
And Uvo 4, both of which have appeared in Star Wars Bounty Hunter, and both of which we covered in my retrospective of that game. Those aside, there are some really cool maps available here. I mean, we'll see some underwater areas, some lava pit industrial areas, destroyed cities. I mean, I was quite frankly shocked at how cool some of these environments are. One of these locations went on to appear in Episode 2, showing a pod race on a hologram of the cantina Anakin and Obi-Wan chase Zam Wesell into. See that there? That's Ando Prime, and we can race various versions of that track here on Episode 1 Racer. Man, I love the connectivity of old Star Wars. Another planet we get to see is the oceanic world of Aquilaris, which fans might recognize sort of being mentioned in the novel Star Wars Knight Errant. Though the planet mentioned there was Aquilaris Minor, not the main world we see in this game. Still similar, I'm pretty sure they're the same system. My favorite track, however, is found on the planet of Ord Ibana, built around an old derelict mining colony that a scrapper named Death Row Glock retrofitted into 3 different pod racing tracks to play on. Avid readers of the Star Wars Jedi comics from 2003 may remember spotting this one in issue number 4 titled Count Dooku. That's enough lore ranting about planets, let's talk about the gameplay a little bit. The primary game mode is called Tournament, and it's what I described before, where you'll play through a series of 4 increasingly difficult circuits. It's a championship, and it's the mode you'll be spending the most time with. That being said, there are 2 other modes to talk about. That's the free race mode, and is exactly what it sounds like. You can play any level previously unlocked with any racer previously unlocked, which seems kinda useless to be honest, because you can just do that in the tournament mode as well. The only difference is that in free race mode you can set the difficulty of the enemy AI, but typically it's the tracks themselves that are hard, not really the opponents. Then lastly, you've got the time attack mode, which again is exactly what it sounds like, racing against the clock to get the best time you can. The unique thing about this mode is that it removes your opponents from the map and allows you to focus on just getting the best possible time you can on the track. Time attack is also totally absent from the PC version of the game, but that one does allow you to just remove opponents from free race mode for a somewhat similar experience. Getting into the game itself, Racer really is your standard fare racing game. Speed ahead, make 3 laps around a course, and beat your competition to the finish line. That being said, there are a few things that make it stand out. One of those being the repair mechanics. See, your pod racer can actually take some serious damage on these very dangerous tracks. So much so that seeing it outright explode is going to be a pretty common visual. With this in mind, you can actually make repairs mid-race to try and account for the damage you might be taking like we see in the film. Doing this slows your vehicle down, but if you time things right, that slight temporary slowdown can be preferable to the 3-second setback of watching your pod racer explode. You can speed your repairs up by buying pit droids from Watto, which also cost you Trugets, but are probably going to be worth the investment in the long run. Another more conventional racing game mechanic is your boost. Working similar to how you might expect a nitrous boost to work in a game like Need for Speed, this becomes crucial to actually winning races in later circuits. You can use it repeatedly, but it does require both a brief 1-second charge up and a roughly 3-second cooldown. But because it can slowly overheat your engines, you have to know how long to use it, which actually means you can use it strategically for smaller boosts to close the gap between you and your competitors, or just blow nearly all of it on one big advantage gain on a straight stretch. Other than that, it's going to be a really straightforward gameplay experience. There isn't much to say on the music either, since it's pretty much all just Williams tracks ripped straight from the first movie's score, which helps it fit nice and snug as an Episode 1 tie-in. One thing I will say is music only plays when you start your third and final lap. I thought this was a strange decision at first because the first 2 laps feel kinda quiet when you first start playing, but after a few levels I really got it. When the challenge starts to increase, that final lap can feel very intense, so the music kicking in right as you recognize it's make or break time helps everything to feel all more climactic. And honestly, the team did such a good job with all the sound effects for the pod racers that having those first 2 laps to really tune into the different sounds of your racer speeding through the environment or the chugging sounds of it being repaired help make it feel more like that first part of the movie's race sequence when there's not music, just the sounds of the race. Honestly, LucasArts really nailed the feeling of flying through a course at 500 miles an hour. Star Wars Racer was met with some above-average reviews upon its release, garnering 7s, 8s, and 9s from major video game journalists at the time, and went on to become a serious cult classic both among Star Wars fans, racing game fans, and N64 fans in general. It is such a classic that it has since seen multiple re-releases and ports to modern hardware, including the PS4, Xbox One, and even the Nintendo Switch. Point is, people loved it then and still seem to love it now. Okay, so do I think Star Wars Episode 1 Racer is worth going back and trying for yourself? I'm pretty sure you've been able to garner a good idea of my answer, and that is yes. Episode 1 Racer is absolutely worth going back to experience for yourself. Not only is it a great Star Wars game, I personally think it's an awesome racing game in its own right. Like, even if this wasn't Star Wars, all of these really creative and exciting levels, mixed with solid gameplay and ample customization, adds up to an excellent racing game, just in general. The Star Wars skin just makes it feel all the more recognizable and fun. So if you're looking for an over-the-top sci-fi racing game on the N64, you really can't go wrong with this one.
Hello, Evan. You have spent your time playing video games, doing the same tasks over and over, wasting away whilst society leaves you behind. Today, your will to continue this is going to be tested. I want to play a game. Before you is a video game from the year 2009. In order to escape, you must complete the same repetitive puzzle minigames over and over. The same way you've completed your videos over and over again. Each puzzle will be more monotonous and annoying than the last. Each hour of gameplay less satisfying and more soul-sucking. Will you complete this game to make yet another video on it? Or will you simply give up, returning to the mediocrity of regular existence? Live or die, Evan. Make your choice.
This video was not planned, but I got struck with the want to play this game because after introducing my girlfriend to the Saw films for the first time for Halloween month, I sort of got back into the franchise. The Saw films are my favorite horror movies by far, but I've literally never played either of the games before. And hey, since it takes place during the winter and we can see it snowing throughout the game, may as well write it off as a Christmas special. Today we're pulling the first Saw video game off the Retro Room shelf. Released in October 2009 and published by Konami of all brands, executives stated openly that they hope to make Saw their next big video game series and a spiritual successor to their previous horror hit, Silent Hill. This wasn't how the game was intended, however, as it originally began development by Brash Entertainment in 2005, who claimed they wanted to make the game follow up the first movie and allow the player to assume the role of multiple victims across the game, attempting to break free and overcome the traps laid for them. After this announcement, however, the game went dark for years until eventually showing up again at Comic-Con 2008 under the marketing tagline, "Dying to Play?" With this new reveal, Brash Entertainment said they'd handed development over to Zombie Studios, but would still act as publishers. They also claimed that both James Wan and Lee Wanell, the original writers and director of Saw, had come on board to help with the game's story. At this point, however, the development hell I'm seeing normally always suggests bad things despite their claims that development was on the up and up. Wouldn't you know it, just a few months later in November, Brash Entertainment announced that they were ceasing all operations, citing financial difficulties. Without Brash Entertainment to publish the game, Lionsgate was left holding the bag for a game with multiple years of completed development and no one to publish. Reportedly, there were discussions within Lionsgate regarding them just publishing the game themselves, but due to the lack of experience in their company regarding video games, as they were a movie studio, the idea was shot down. This is where Konami came into the picture. In February 2009, Konami agreed to handle publishing of the game in exchange for the rights to oversee the game's final development and the rights to future video games in the series as well. That is when they decided to try and mold it into their spiritual successor series to Silent Hill. Okay, so the rocky development is established, and this game's existence is honestly impressive considering what all went into getting it released. Unfortunately, that almost never means anything good for video games. Now, I'm a big fan of the movies, as mentioned earlier, having seen the first few several times, and I don't even really like horror movies. I'm not a horror guy or anything like I see a lot of. I just love the John Kramer character, and I'm so fascinated by the psychological aspects that it makes me love the movies. Well, most of them anyway. But I've never played the games until I decided to give this one a try, so I was going in almost completely blind outside of knowing a few minor things, which we'll get to later. So let's get into the game. Saw is a third-person adventure game with a heavy emphasis on puzzle solving. There are some combat mechanics, although they're not very good. I'll talk about that more later too. You'll spend nearly all of your time with this game making your way through the levels and solving puzzles to get access to the next room. First off, look at this menu. I really love how this was handled. The little icon in the bottom left, the design of the off-white tile room giving a sense of familiarity to the series. Everything about this is really great. They nailed the main menu. I wish I could say that about more things in this game though. Saw was developed on Unreal Engine 3, and it looks passable. There's sections of the game that I feel would have been fine due to the overall grungy aesthetic of the game's setting and locale, but then there's some sections that are just ugly. And it's not just because the game is old. This was released in 2009 and looks like a shiny game from 2005, which makes sense since it started development in 2005 and then just lingered and spun itself in circles for 2 or 3 more years. Now, I will give it that I'm emulating it with Xenia, so there's some lighting issues and a few other graphical quirks that make it look worse than it otherwise would be in my footage, but it doesn't look much better in footage from the PC version I've seen. The narrative apparently had help from series creators Lee Wanell and James Wan, though I really question just how much involvement they really had. Genuinely, and this is just a shot in the dark from me, I think they probably pitched the scenario of the game's plot, and that was it. Because early articles about the game's development suggest that the game was to feature multiple playable characters across a series of different traps whom the player would guide to survival or death. That is not at all the game we got, however. Instead, the game opens with Detective Tapp from the first film strapped to a chair with the iconic reverse bear trap on his head. I say Detective Tapp, but he's that character in name and concept only. Danny Glover did not reprise his role for this game, and the voice actor they got did not even make an attempt to sound like him. Taking over as Detective Tapp for this game is voice actor Earl Alexander, best known for his work as Lewis from the Left 4 Dead games. I will say he does a fine job in his performance here, but it is just not at all the same character from the movie. And it's not even the voice either. His lines don't even sound like things the character would say. And even worse, he looks nothing like Danny Glover. Like, at all. I understand they may have had issues with attaining a likeness or something, but this doesn't even remotely resemble Detective Tapp. It looks more like his younger brother or something. I mean, it's not even close. Which is just one reason why I think the series creators had next to no involvement on this game, despite them being credited and marketed as having worked on it. The setup here is that after Tapp was shot in the climax of the first film, Jigsaw nursed him somewhat back to health and then stuffed him into his trap. So in order to make Tapp atone for all the people he's hurt with his vicious obsession in finding Jigsaw, Tapp will have to overcome a series of different traps forcing him to face everyone he's hurt, most of whom have also hurt someone themselves as well. The first of these victims is Amanda Young. If you're a fan of the series, this whole sequence is not only hard to sit through, it's downright canon breaking. I don't think there's anyone defending these games as being canon, but they were sort of pitched to the market that way, as if they were going to fit snugly within the movie timeline. Well, if you've seen even the first 3 movies, I don't have to tell you why Amanda being put in this trap and saved by Tapp makes no sense. You might be thinking, well, maybe the developers didn't know how involved Amanda was going to be when they made the game. Well, included with Saw the video game is a trailer for Saw 6, which means not only had Saw 2 and 3 already been released, but so had 4 and 5 when this game was finished. And it gets even worse actually, because again, this character does not in any way resemble Amanda. They weren't able to get Shawnee Smith for the game either, which, okay, no big deal, because they got Jennifer Taylor to fill the spot, who we all know is an incredibly talented voice actress, most known for her role as Cortana in the Halo games. But she must have been given very little voice direction by the studio because her performance here isn't very good, and I hate saying that because I know how great of a voice actress she is, but I gotta call it like it is. Almost no one offers a believable performance in this game. It almost all sounds phoned in. But the thing is, I don't think it is being phoned in. I think the devs at Zombie Studios literally just didn't have any experience directing their voice cast and ended up squandering some very solid potential voice actors. There's one major exception, but I'll get to that.
We're all here because of you, detective. Oh, the hell with this.
The longer I played through this game, the more exhausted I became, continuously hoping for the game to just end already. By the first hour, you've encountered nearly every single mechanic in the game, and the following 5 hours are just a repetition of those exact same mechanics, which works for some games, but in this game, the 10th time you've solved a circuit box puzzle, or even worse, the gear puzzle, you really start to get tired of it. Occasionally you might stumble upon a unique trap, but really almost every trap in the game is just one of the 3 minigames, sometimes with extra steps. There's a less common pipe minigame, for instance, but it's equally as frustrating. All throughout this, we're watching as Detective Tapp faces down a multitude of different people who have somehow been impacted by his obsession with catching Jigsaw. including Melissa Singh, the wife of Tap's partner who we saw get his head rearranged while chasing Jigsaw in the first film. Each time we encounter one of these characters, we have to solve an elaborate puzzle to free them, and I'm pretty sure most of them die shortly after. The seeds of an interesting story are definitely here, but they've been reaped by writers who didn't really have the chops to do the story justice. The gameplay is going to be comprised mostly of walking from room to room, avoiding traps like broken glass, which will damage your health due to Tap not having shoes, or shotgun traps, which will be your primary cause of death. Every few rooms you'll come across a Jigsaw puzzle symbol giving you a heads up that you're about to face a timed trap which you'll have to solve before you either explode or someone dies. And then lastly, there is some combat. Tap has a light melee attack and a heavier one, or if you block an enemy strike in time you can perform an instant kill counterattack combo. There are a lot of unique weapons scattered around to use, which is cool in concept. Fighting people off with broom handles or mannequin arms would be neat if your light attack wasn't literally the most OP attack in the game. Seriously, just spam Tap's light attack right hook and you'll take down pretty much everyone with ease. Even if that wasn't the case though, this combat is terrible. I knew it was going to be bad going in due to some reviews I remember watching a few years back, like the one from G-Man Lives, but I'd hoped maybe he was hamming it up for the video. He wasn't. Fighting enemies actually feels like playing an unfinished pre-alpha build of what they were hoping the combat could look like. I can see how it sort of reflects Silent Hill titles like Origins or Downpour with its breakable weapons and clunky combat, but it's even worse than those. Spamming the light attack is satisfying in spite of the intended design, not because of it. It's pretty amusing to just punch dudes to death, but you can easily tell this wasn't what the devs had in mind. So the combat is really terrible, but it's really not the star of the show, and you won't be doing it much. So what about the real star of the show? The puzzles and the traps. Well, I mean, there are some really cool trap designs, but the best ones are just rehashes from the movies. The reverse bear trap, the shotgun collars, the pendulum. I mean, they're cool, but we've seen them before. Most of the new traps the game does introduce are really not that good. Amanda's antidote toxin mixer trap, for instance, is boring. The puzzles are, again, passable. Most of them aren't that bad, but for a game where you'll be spending most of your time solving puzzles based on an intellectual property known for its highly unique and intense traps, this is such a massive missing of the mark. And would you believe me if I told you that there's multiple endings to this game? In fact, if you die, you'll often see a little message at the bottom of the screen that reads, "Actions have consequences." This could lead you to believe the game itself is testing you, watching how you act, how quick you are to kill. There are various instances where Tap kills people throughout the game via various methods, and I can think of at least 2 instances where I killed someone who I could have avoided. One of which I blew up by activating his trap when I could have left him alone. So you might be thinking all of this plays into your ending, like a Silent Hill game or something. You know, that game Konami said they wanted this one to act as a spiritual successor to? Well, it doesn't. The ending is split between 2 options represented by 2 doors at the end of the game. You just pick which one to walk through and that decides your ending. So the combat sucks, the story is a miss, and the puzzle solving is a mediocre letdown. Is there anything redeeming about the game? Well, yes, there are precisely 3 good things about the game, the first of which is the environment. The insane asylum where the game takes place is utterly oppressive. They really did manage to nail the atmosphere. The environment design is one of the only things that actually does feel like it came straight out of a Saw film. Not to mention a lot of the little notes we find from former patients across the building are genuinely horrifying. One of the little world-building notes you can find was written by a small child who was talking about how he was going to be put on an iron lung, and how he was having an orderly write his thoughts down so his diary wouldn't forget him. And that really made me feel more uncomfortable than any of the brutal traps or gore in the game. Like, I don't really feel super comfortable praising the game for accomplishing that through such means, but one of the most compelling aspects of the Saw films is how they make us look at so many things in life we all try to turn away from and pretend don't exist. So, I guess they did achieve that through some of the notes scattered around the asylum. Several of them were like that too, so I'll give it to the devs. They really pulled it off with their environment design and atmosphere, which I'm considering is two parts of the same concept of world building. The second good thing about the game is the music. It's definitely not as good as the scores from the movies composed by Charlie Clouser, but it's super fitting for the game and definitely does justice to the Saw branding. It manages to capture that same melodic industrial feeling from the movies in a way that fits super well for the asylum you're in. The whole game score was handled by Alex Gilbert, and I really loved what he was able to put together. If most of this music appeared in a real Saw film, I probably wouldn't even notice the difference. It's that good. Honestly, I kind of feel like the score deserved a better game to go with it. It'll probably come as no surprise to hear that this game was not reviewed super favorably, but it was still appreciated more than you might expect. Most people tended to like the excitement of playing through the traps and exploring the haunting interiors of the asylum. Then of course, everyone unanimously praised one major thing about the game, and it's that third good thing I said the game got right.
Detective, your obsession with me has destroyed your own life and driven you here, like a rat escaping the heat of the sun. I think you know someone down here, your old friend from the Force, Jennings Foster. You might want to ask him what really happened in that hit-and-run case you two worked on. That is, if he is alive, by the time you find him. Can you forgive one who has forsaken justice to protect himself? I suggest you hurry, Detective.
Remember earlier when I was criticizing the voice acting in this game, but I said there was one big exception to how bad it is? Well, if you haven't guessed it by now, Tobin Bell came on board to reprise his role as Jigsaw, and he absolutely nails it. The game is always at its very best when we see Billy the Puppet pop up on one of those CRT television screens and hear his distorted voice talking to us. So the thing about Tobin Bell is that he understands the character of Jigsaw to the point where I bet he didn't even need any voice direction to nail these lines. For those of you who aren't aware, Tobin Bell himself actually rewrote almost all of his lines from the second Saw film. In fact, a caveat for his involvement a lot of times is his approval of the script. There is a part of Jigsaw within Tobin Bell to the point where he was working with Donnie Wahlberg on the set of Saw 2 as they reworked a lot of lines to work better. In fact, in several scripts throughout the franchise, the screenwriters would just make a notation for Tobin Bell to insert his own dialogue in some parts because they knew his contributions were some of the most compelling parts of the films. Even in Saw 10, Tobin made various changes to Jigsaw's character before he would agree to come on board. So, I can't say I'm surprised how well he handled this aspect of the game. He didn't need any voice direction. He understood his character better than the people who hired him because most of Jigsaw's best lines were written by Tobin Bell to begin with. So yeah, at the very least, the titular character is handled very well, and every time he's on screen in any capacity is a total treat. Now we're to that part of the video where I answer the big question: is Saw worth playing for yourself? As much as it might pain me as a Saw fan to say, no, it's not worth playing. I'll be honest, this game really sucks. The story is bland and badly acted at the best of times, the gameplay is boring at best and broken at worst, and its visual offerings aren't very nice to look at. So I mean, like, what does that even leave? It might be worth watching a playthrough or just a compilation of Jigsaw's scenes because the music is great, and Tobin Bell's performance as John Kramer is literally better than anything else in the game. I mean, maybe if it was 3 hours shorter than it is, I could at least recommend it to hardcore fans of the series who could enjoy seeing the traps from the movies in the game, and maybe that would even justify the two different endings. But the reality is that the game is too damn long, and over half of it is just repeating the same 3 puzzles over and over again with minor exploration and bad combat in between. If the game was like a tight-knit 3-hour experience reducing the filler content between big traps, then maybe I could have justified a playthrough for fans of the series. As is, however, the game ran me roughly 6 hours long, nearly all of which sucked. There's a very good reason all of the movies are on the shorter side, because extended stays in these kinds of environments alone are exhausting as it is. Mix in monotony, repetitious gameplay, and a half-baked plot, then you've got a recipe for a waste of fucking time. So I'm strongly suggesting we leave this one on the Retro Room shelf and spend our time finding better titles. Thanks for joining me on this one, guys. I'm always looking for good games to try out here on the Retro Room, so if you've got a suggestion of one you'd like to see me cover next year, drop a comment and let me know. As always, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, that's all I've got for you.
Game over.
Well, I gotta say, I had a lot of fun with that. Going through these 11 somewhat obscure games this season had its ups, downs, challenges, and payoffs, but it was some of the most fun I had last year. I know I did a lot of Star Wars games, but I just really wanted a chance to go and play them, and this was such a good format to do so. If you've got suggestions for some games you'd love to see covered in Season 2, comment them down below, and we may see if we can find it on the shelf next time. If you enjoyed this video, I ask that you press the like button, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing so that you don't miss out on new videos. Members of the channel receive exclusive early access to videos as well, so if you're really loving the content, consider becoming a member. It's really been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you all back here next time in the Retro Room.